We are live.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to an intelligent conversation. Today is an exciting day in the United States and the world, and we're going to be discussing it here today. We're going to look back at the events that unfolded over the past few days. We're going to look ahead to the immediate future, see what the next month or so has in store for us, and we'll discuss the potential future of our country under a Joe Biden presidency. And we'll try to do it while keeping it light and fun on a day like today. And I'll even try to tone down my usual trademark pessimism. I'm Matt Lessinger here as always with my co-host Nolan Dalla. And we welcome you to the 8th installment of an Intelligent Conversation, or as we're calling it today, the Joe Biden's acceptance speech pregame show. For anyone that is watching, we will be talking for about an hour. Then we'll be taking a break while Kamala Harris and Joe Biden give their speeches. And after their speeches, we'll come back, maybe have another hour or so of further conversation. So let's get started. We have a fantastic group assembled today. I'm so happy. We have Vin Narayanan. Thank you for joining us again. Vin was a political writer and editor for USA Today, and his political insight has just been tremendous. So thank you, Vin.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. Nolan, would you do the honors of introducing Joe and Linda, please? I think you could do them justice a lot better than I can.
And Matt, quality introduction of my name. You did better than Nolan's ever done.
Oh, I got some stuff in store for you, Vin. First of all, thank you for joining us. If you're on Facebook Live, thank you so much. We're going to try to get to some comments. I know that some of them will be readable on the air. Some of them won't be. But thank you anyway. It's a moment of celebration. And I can't think of really we got a lot of good friends out there, but we got superstar lineup here. Vin, of course, you were so damn good in your pre-election analysis that, Matt's the one who said we just got to have Vin back again. And
thank you. I appreciate it, both of you. I had a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, you were just awesome. So you were so dead on that we've got to now get your analysis for what's the future of the country. And then talk about two other superstars. Here we go. Joe Stapleton, Stapes. Poker commentator, comedian, and by the way, stand-up comedy. This is a guy used to hecklers. He's used to dealing with the heat, and he's on TV all the time. A lot of shows you've been on. Joe Stapleton, you and I have never been on a show together. I am so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. I wasn't going to do a lot of gloating today, but I am going to consider this to be kind of the victory lap. So I'm in. And Vin, I got kind of nervous when you announced Vin's credentials, because I just got to say thank you. To you and all journalists out there who are doing what I do, except you aren't allowed to be funny and you get all the same hate and you get no money. So thanks. It's three awesome things. Thank you. And all the rest of the journalists out there.
First of all, you're welcome. You're right on all three counts. I used to be at USA Today. I am now with early investing and, trying to do journalism in the financial business and make some money at the same time. So hopefully, we can marry the two, but I have never stopped doing the political analyst that the media workers do. And I appreciate the fact that you said that. The journalists out there have done yeoman's work in the face of anger and hatred. And I have nothing but the utmost respect for all of those people. And the same with the poll workers out there. And I'll get into that later, but thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, there are a lot of heroes today, and I'm at the bottom of the list. I'm not even on the list. I was mostly
thanking everyone else, but since you're right here.
Yeah, works for me.
I have to start off with an apology to Linda because I totally derailed before her introduction.
Nolan, back to you. I'm having a good time just watching.
It's always the lady who gets introduced last.
Continue watching. That way I can drink, Nolan, if I continue watching.
Come on, we're gonna toast in a second. We're gonna do that. And of course, Vin, I'm sorry you went over to the dark side. I know you're really trying to get that Wall Street Journal editor job. I think that's in your future. So, go ahead and make some money while you can. And speaking of money, and somebody who's been there on TV, high profile criminal defense attorney, defended some real scumbags. Not sure they were.
Oh, stop!
They were not guilty, but
wait a second.
Some real rich guilty before
Aaron Hernandez wasn't convicted under my watch. Casey Anthony wasn't convicted under my watch. Michael Skakel just got his conviction overturned and I've been with that team since after he was convicted. So I don't know what you're talking about. You might be talking about some other lawyer, but my clients are not guilty.
Well, listen,
Lawyer's
you was played
answer.
by Helen Mirren in a movie, okay? Say no more. The great Linda Baden, married to, by the way, a guy who's pretty famous himself, a New York City pathologist, one of the most amazing men I have ever met, Michael Baden. So that's why she has that funny, weird name, Linda Kenney Baden, a Jersey girl.
Absolutely a Jersey girl, and one who loves Veuve Clicquot. Not that I want to be a widow, because I don't ever want to be a widow, but widow Clicquot in the rosé mode. We're just sitting back here, and
Is Linda
when
doing
we finish
plugs
tonight,
already?
I'm going to open it.
Was that a plug? Are you getting paid for that?
No, you know what? Good point, Joe. I should think about that. Really,
I'm
I
looking
hope you're
for things on
listening, Pop
Joe's
Off
shelf now
Vodka.
that he's getting paid for.
Nolan, do you want to just propose a toast now? I mean, the cat's out of the bag. You might as well go for it now.
Yeah.
Problem is mine's not open. I'll have to go for water. Where's my water?
I got my
Okay.
water. Yeah.
I have our water.
Hey, hold
Okay.
on a second. You guys are gonna kick off this
Nah.
with a
We
toast.
got to
with
close
water?
with the toast.
All right, my
You're
bad.
gonna be
My
Okay.
kidding me? Are you
Okay.
trying to ruin
Whoa,
America
whoa,
again
whoa, I'm
already?
out. There's no way I'm sitting here 2.5 hours with you guys and not having a drink.
No, the toast can be at any point, but I don't think that's a bad omen to start with
That's
water,
right.
isn't
You
it?
can't toast with water. It's
Yeah.
it's bad luck to toast with water. You're right.
Oh, how
Shoot,
dare
okay.
you?
All right, my bad. Oh, party fouls just left and right. I'm sorry.
You've already
I'll get
lost
on it.
control of the show, Matt.
All right. Back on track here. The introductions are made. All right. I'm excited to get started. And I think Joe could probably attest to this, that maybe it's been a struggle for many of us to maintain our sense of humor during Trump's presidency. I have to share what I thought was the funniest thing I read yesterday. While the outcome had not yet been formally declared, maybe some of you saw this already. Someone wrote, "It's day 4 of this hostage crisis, and Wolf Blitzer just felt the need to tell us how many electoral votes are needed to win. Motherfucker, I know the name of the registrar in Clark County, Nevada, how to pronounce every town in Georgia, and where every Republican in Arizona lives." Credit to Turnt Woodridge for that. But that had me cracking up. But his point is made, where especially for laymen like myself, we learned a hell of a lot more about the election mechanics than we ever thought we would. So I guess my general question is, for everybody, what is your personal takeaway from the past 4 days? Like from Election Day Tuesday until this morning, it's Saturday morning when Biden and Harris were officially declared the winners. I'll start with you, Joe. Just tell us your thoughts.
Honestly, I probably has a fairly unique experience in that I didn't feel great Tuesday night about things, and I realized that there was literally nothing I could do, and I checked out. I checked out like 9:30 Tuesday night. Woke up in the morning, a few people had texted me like little updates. I've been super busy, and it's just been like just glancing at it every once in a while and just staying in a place where I could have handled either outcome. It's crazy because I'm a fucking comedian. I don't want to care about this shit. I don't want to be this serious. Be like, I was preparing myself mentally just in case there was a bad outcome. I want to be talking about farts. This is like the most frustrating 4 years of my life. I don't want to be the annoying guy preaching to people on the internet. I just want to do fucking puns. So I checked out, and people are like, I can't believe it's taking so long. I'm like, is it taking long? I'm not really paying attention. And what I've taken from it is that sometimes good things come true, and you don't have to, like, you do your part, and then you just wake up one day and it happens. So there, like a fairy tale. That's what I'm taking away from it.
Nice. Vin, how about you?
My biggest takeaway, I mean, it's weird, but my biggest takeaway is the astounding professionalism of the people who count our votes. It is remarkable. I mean, and you can look at it and you can say that, look, there are all sorts of reasons why it took as long as it did for the votes to be counted. And there are a lot of ways that we could have sped the system up. However, none of that blame falls on the people actually doing the vote counting. You've got Republicans and Democrats working together on identity verification and making sure that every ballot counts. You have observers from both parties that are in there vigilantly watching every step of the way. And then you have people who are actually doing the work of opening the envelopes, running them through the scanner, helping out at the ballot boxes, helping out at the polls, making sure everything gets done well, gets done properly. These people work incredibly hard, incredibly fast, incredibly efficiently. And right now the election is called and they still have weeks of work left to do recounts, certify the election, do all of that sort of stuff. And they get absolutely no thanks from us. They get absolutely no appreciation from us. Yet this election went off flawlessly because of them. And I think I appreciate them now more than ever, and my hat's off to them.
Hear, hear. They will definitely be included in our toast at the end of the show.
Also, they get a sweet $15 an hour. Don't forget about that. Thank you.
Yeah.
A $600 check after 100 hours of work.
It's a thankless job, but hopefully we can give them our share of thanks. Linda, how about you? What has your takeaway been?
Well, let me just start with something that Joe said. I stayed up late Tuesday night, and quite frankly, all my friends said, don't turn on the TV. You're not going to know anything till Friday. They were wrong. Obviously, it was Saturday. You're just going to, it's like what's the Catholic sect with self-flagellation, right? That's going to be what it's like. So my husband went to sleep because he was like, I'm going to bed, okay? Because we're not going to know anything till Friday. All right. So I stayed up and I was kind of morose when I saw Georgia and the 600,000 vote lead in Pennsylvania because we've been staying because of the pandemic in our cabin that we built in the Catskills, and it borders on Pennsylvania. And 4 years ago, we drove to the neighboring town of Pennsylvania and then got lost coming back for 7 hours, purposely.
Cool.
And we didn't see any Hillary signs. And it was the same weekend where Trump's grabbed them by the what came out. And we were just laughing, he's finished. But we didn't see any Hillary signs. And then after the election, we were like, that was a clue. This time, we went out the same weekend, a couple of weeks ago, and we saw so many Biden-Harris signs. I said to Michael, he's going to win. He's going to win. This is totally different. This is a clue. So I stayed up, and then when Joe Biden came on the air, I think it was about 1:30 in the morning or 1:10 in the morning, he was so confident. He's got that perfect posture, perfectly tailored suits and all. And he was just so confident. I was like, okay, we're going to win. So that was my good moment. My bad moment is when I look at the election honestly, and again, last week we were driving down the road going into the city, and I was almost rear-ended by one of the Trump, because of the Trump caravan, one of these caravans in New York City that ended up closing down the bridges. And I said, there's still 70 million people who voted for him, given what he has done. And they're going to be with us whether he is reelected or isn't reelected. And I'm not sure we have a path forward to deal with that. So that's my down moment and my up moment of this election.
I think a lot of us are feeling that is this, we're relieved, but we're not out of the woods. And
Linda's down moment is something I feel almost like it would be easier for me to count the times a day that I don't feel that, just looming, dreading in my stomach, and thinking about ways to fix it. And I have no good ideas. I have several bad ideas, but I don't have a single good one. And that's ever present with me. That's why I couldn't even really celebrate when people were like, aren't you happy? And I'm like, yes, but
yeah.
I
mean, look, I made up my mind that today will be for celebration for myself, and then tomorrow, fuck, it's out the window. But today,
then you shouldn't have asked about our down moments and our up moments.
My bad.
Bad.
No. I'm feeling it when you said it. I'm feeling it too. Of course. I mean,
No, but okay. Let me bring it back to something funny. Rachel Maddow tweeted earlier tonight, and I retweeted it, a Bloomberg article talking about Rudy Giuliani, the Borat star, okay, tucking in his pants. All right, let's get back to the funny. And she said this has to be the line of the election. He gave a presser today, and out of place, a landscape company nestled between a crematorium and an adult film store. If that doesn't make everyone laugh and feel better right now, nothing will.
Oh my God, the optics of that! Holy cow! Nolan, how about you? What can you tell us?
Well, I've had a very, throughout the Trump presidency, I've had a very, I would call it an existential existence and reaction to all of the emotional challenges at deciphering and reacting to this information and outrage overload. I mean, you have to manage your personal life. You still have to pay your bills, go to work, and more important and maybe more difficult, maintain positive relationships with friends, with family, with associates, with people that come in, you're the plumber, the next door neighbor, the person at the hardware store, again, people in your family. So throughout this divisive period, almost a political civil war, not a civil war like we had in the 1860s, but a political civil war, yes, that went about 4 or 5 years. And here we are 150 years later. And in a social media sense, it's the same blue versus gray, not north versus south. It's not so much geographical, but it's based on a lot of differences to, I should say, a lot of differences and the way we react to looking at the same picture. We live in the same country. This is not like previous wars where we, on different sides of the ocean, who looked at the world in fundamentally different ways through different prisms, whether that was religion, our politics, our traditions, our old ethnic conflicts. These are people in the same country, all of us, who look at the same speech on television from Trump, read the same tweets, have been exposed to exactly the same, not quite the same, because there's different channels of reporting, of course, but we've come to vastly different conclusions. And for me, it's been difficult, let's say, to segregate my personal feelings toward a lot of people that not only, and I say this with great sincerity and sadness, people that I like and in many cases love, who have profoundly disappointed me, not just in their lack of a moral compass. And I mean, we could go on to the outrage of why Trump is so awful, but what are you not seeing, people? Seriously. So, I mean, I'm trying to and it's going to take me some time. When the Civil War happened, when I know these sound like, oh, Vietnam, all this. I know that sounds like I'm being hyperbolic. No, I'm not. For people in this generation, this is our Vietnam. I'm not making that up. And it's going to take some time to heal. And I'm willing to meet them halfway. Hell, I'm willing to go cross the line on an olive branch. Yes, I am, because we have to. But it's not easy.
I just want to put voice to some of the things that you said there, because I think you covered a lot of ground, and it's part of why I voluntarily removed myself from Facebook a couple of years ago. I didn't want to, just didn't want to deal with it. And I firmly believe my life's been better ever since I did that. And it has, although I have missed, but thank God everyone else tells me about everything Nolan puts on Facebook, including calling the White House and offering to help him move, which is just outstanding. But on that side, one of the interesting things moving forward is what I like to call the politics of unity. And how do the politics of unity work? And the politics of unity, I feel like, have three components. First is a willingness to reach your hand across the aisle. And so that's the first part. Then the second part is incumbent on the other parties, which is a willingness to look at that extended hand and not treat it as a sign of weakness. And then the third is a willingness to accept that extended hand. All three components have to be there in order for the politics of unity to work. And if any of those three components are missing, then the whole equation doesn't work. And so I feel like we're entering a stage where we've got we have a leader who's willing to extend that hand. Check. So now the question is, to the people to whom that hand is being extended, are they going to look at it as a sign of weakness or as a sign of strength? And three, are they going to accept it?
Then
Right?
we only know what they're going to do because they've done it every single time Ether is moved the football, and it's the prisoner's dilemma. And we're always like, we're going to split the money, right? We're going to split the money. You promised this time.
Yeah.
We're going to split the money. And they're like, yes, of course we promise. And they fuck us every time.
Great point.
And this is the ultimate problem, right? Is that this is the ultimate problem, is how is it going to be viewed? And this is always a frustrating conversation for me personally, because I have on one side my professional side where I maintain objectivity and all of this sort of stuff, and I do my best, and I am able to maintain objectivity even while having my own personal views. You are allowed to do that. All of us do that in one form or another, and it is capable of doing that. And so you have people who are rightly feeling on one side, it's like, wait a minute. You just spent the last 4 years dancing all over us, laughing at us, and stomping on us. And the moment things change the other way, it's like, oh, you have to be nice to us? Where was that? And not only that, but, oh, well, you better govern the way we want you to govern. Otherwise, it's going to be all out war. Well, no, that's not quite the way it works. But on the other hand, there has to be an effort, an engagement to engage people, because that's the only way the country moves forward. But I think it's reasonable and fair to say, yes, you have to make every effort to engage with the people you don't know, you don't like, or disagree with you. But you also have every right to expect that in return. And if you don't get it in return, I think it's reasonable to say, well, no, this has to be a two-way street. And if it's not, we have to go a different direction. And I just think that's reasonable.
Well, like you pointed out,
the problem you have is going to be when you engage in some things, like a number of friends, clients, very supportive of Trump. Not really, I would say. They're supportive of the stock market and the making of the money. Okay. All right. So that's one level, right? So that's an easier person to deal with, because the markets are going to react appropriately to Biden without having all the craziness that's going around all the time. But then you have the other person who just nothing anyone does to the Democrat, and everything Trump does is perfect, and they hate you, right? And then you have somewhere in between, I think, in the middle of this country, some of it's based on racism, some of it's based on, there's a feeling that they've been left behind. The people have been left behind in this great American dream. And they blame others for being left behind, whether it's the Democrats, who they feel have become, as Bernie Sanders said, coastal elites, or whether it's the Black person or the immigrants who they feel has taken away their job when they haven't. And maybe that's because they can't understand that maybe somebody else could be better at what they do, right? Or maybe somebody else is willing to take a job they are not willing to take. So I think we're going to have to deal with that middle section. You can't deal with the crazy. You can certainly deal with the person who just thinks that Trump is it because of money. But we're going to have to deal somehow with that midsection of America that thinks they've been left behind and is looking for somebody to help them.
I agree. I agree, Linda. I think that's spot on. But it only works if they're willing to engage.
Right.
And that's the problem. I mean, if you take a look at the history of the United States, and the history of the United States shows that people have traditionally moved from opportunity to opportunity. So if you take a look at westward expansion, part of it was for land, part of it for economic opportunity, part of it was the whole thing. It is built into the history of the United States. That's changed, right? People don't move for economic opportunity anymore. There are jobs in Wisconsin that need highly skilled workers, don't need a college degree. They will train you when you get there. You will end up making $125,000 to $150,000 a year, right? You will, because that's the nature of the work. And
Hey, can you give me that phone number there, Vin?
I can provide it to you, but they can't get anyone to move there to take them up
Right.
on the offer. And so and I get the sense of feeling left behind and frustrated, because I feel it too, right? I'm sitting here looking at a profession that I love, being in the media, just being torn apart and decimated and impossible to make a living. And I've had to make hard choices about how I'm going to move on in life. I've had to make very tough choices. And so I get that sense of optimism. I get that sense of thing. But on the other hand, you know, part of what made America great was, and I feel like this is a spirit that, you know, we have to revisit and bring back. And I think part of it's just a lack of confidence, a lack of belief. And if people had that belief and confidence that it was actually going to work out, I think it would be more adventurous. And we have to figure out how to do that. But is the fact that you want to know what those economic opportunities are out there. You know, it might not be in Kentucky, or it might not be in Indiana, or it might not be where you are. And it might have to require moving, or I mean, maybe this whole era of remote work changes that and you get more opportunities opening up and that sort of thing. But I think one of the things rebuilding our confidence as a country is sort of a weird way of putting it, but it's the only way I can think about it. Because Linda, I mean, I'm 100% agreement with you, but how do we get there? And
Yeah.
so these are the things I'm trying to wrestle with, and I just don't know.
I mean,
Well,
I
the
think
other thing I wrestle with, and I just want to say just one thing, is the racism behind when you do have the hatred or the disdain for the immigrants. And I think, you know, we've seen it. Remember, this is a country that was still lynching people in the 1900s, like the 1950s. We still lynch people. I mean, you know, remember the pictures that you see of all the Trump supporters, and they're gloating, knocking on the windows of the people counting the votes. It reminded me of the lynching pictures, right? So I don't know how we get around that, because that is part of our history. And, you know, people, if you went down south, they were still thinking the war of northern aggression. I went down to try a case in Tennessee, a man wrongfully convicted and eventually was dismissed and went to the U.S. Supreme Court, right? And we walk in for lunch, the local attorney and I, you know, and what happened was there was a whole section of Aunt Jemimas and Rabbin feet and Confederate flags. And they still believed in the war of northern aggression. So how do we cure that? Because that's ingrained, and I'm not sure which group. Is that in the middle group? Is that in the hatred group?
I have some theories on this, actually. I've come to flip-flop a lot, and I thought that either all Trump supporters are racist or they're just okay with racism. And I think that there is a third option that maybe makes up the biggest portion of this, which is they just don't give a fuck about anybody. So I don't think they specifically want Black people to suffer, but they don't give a fuck about helping them. They don't give a fuck about changing, like lifting a single finger, admitting to white privilege, because they don't give a fuck about them. And I think that's slightly different than thinking they shouldn't exist, but just being like, I need mine. I don't give a fuck about anybody else, really, unless you go to my church or I see you in my grocery store. I don't give a fuck about you. So call it racism if you want. I think it's just like almost worse. They don't care about them at all. And most other people, just not a concern. Kids at the border in cages, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up
That's
on
interesting. I
that.
never thought about it that way.
Say that again.
May I pick up on what he just said? What
Absolutely.
Joe just said?
Yeah.
Well, keep in mind that people in this country have been conditioned, particularly the last 40 years since the Reagan years, that government is the enemy. Really, that's a pillar of conservative thought dating back to the William F. Buckley days and even before that. I mean, this started, you could say, back in FDR days when Hubert Hoover, you know, let business be business, and here comes FDR with the New Deal, basically saves American democracy, probably. So we could go back a century on the foundation of these thoughts, that there is about half the country, certainly a third of the country, that views the government as evil or something that can't be great. Whereas liberals, leftists, to some extent Democrats, more Democrats certainly than Republicans, view government as a tool. It is a tool of empowerment, a tool that built the national highway system, the rural electrification project of the 1930s, and brought electricity and plumbing to millions of people across the country that wouldn't have got that, you know, had they just waited for the free market to get to places like the middle of Kansas. It took government to build Hoover Dam, that built the city of Las Vegas where I now live, where people in California can grow food and have water. All that's because of the government creating infrastructure, putting man on the moon. Government. Again, government is capable, with great leadership and with public support, of doing exceptionally terrific things. And that's the message that's been lost here, and that's been really subverted by the conservative movement. I think, and I'll take a little blame here on our side for a moment, and then I'll throw it to you, Vin, that liberals, leftists, particularly the far left, we've done a very poor job selling that message. We get labeled as socialist. I am a socialist, by the way, an unapologetic one. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody that thinks like me is a socialist. There's democratic socialists, there's leftists, there's Democrats. You know, everybody that's in a red state seems to think we're all the same. We're not. We even fight amongst ourselves. Far left, left, soft left. We all fight amongst ourselves. You people on Facebook.
None of you are good enough.
I have more fights with leftists than I do people on the right. So we're constantly changing, interpreting what's going on. But the one thing that we on the left share as a fundamental tenet of what we believe is that we should be better than the way we are. And that requires not individualism, although that's good. It requires cooperation, not competition, cooperation. And that's the essence of socialism. The key word is social engagement, collective goals set and then hopefully accomplished. We put a man on the moon, okay? Because we won World War II. We did some enormous things because of binding together. And now we're at one of those moments. This is not a big moment for the left with Biden, but you know what? Maybe it'll take a surprise here to recreate some of that enthusiasm for the things that we believe in.
Except Nolan, in terms of government, I would just say it gets viewed differently in different contexts. Okay, so when I try a case, right, and we're think back about the Oregon case with the protesters, right? He took over the park, right? There, the parks. It wasn't quite a park, but think about that, right? They were acquitted by the jury out there, right? Because government was bad. So when I go try a case, and I have a defendant on trial who is not white male, the jurors who are not white jurors will look at the government with the skew, right? They're gonna question that. Whereas the more, shall we say, let's just say it, the white jurors, the white men, the older white women will look at it and say, "But it's the government. They're telling me the truth." So how do we get the government in some situations that it's trusted, and in other situations that it's not? And it depends on the context. And I'm not sure how you divide that context.
Yeah, and Linda, I think you're onto something, and Joe, I think you're both onto something. I just want to sort of tie the connective tissue on that together. Which is, you're right, the government means different things in different places. Like, so if you're in the Midwest, all right, you get farm subsidies. That's really important for people out there. That's an example of government working, right? But if you're out on the coast and you're taking a look at the farm subsidies, like, well, wait a minute, why shouldn't the free market count there when it's a free market everywhere else? That's an example of the government not working. And so what is the government working and what is the government not working goes back to what Joe's talking about is, well, I want mine. Is if it's working for me, it's working. If it's not working for me, it's not working. I mean, to me, the ultimate symbol of this election is what happened in Florida. If you take a look at what happened in Florida, $15 per hour minimum wage passed.
Right.
Huge margins. People wanted it, adopted, passed huge margins.
I'm sorry, Vin, to interrupt you. Excuse me, Vin. Did it pass in this election? I that was lost on me. This election,
yes.
Just a minute. It went red. And a $15 minimum hour passed.
This is the point. I know what Vin's getting to here, and it's a great point.
Okay, so $15 per hour minimum wage passed in Florida as a ballot initiative. Huge, right? It was a nonpartisan issue down there. Now, let me ask you the question, and I know how you guys are going to answer it. Imagine if President-elect Biden had come out in favor of $15 an hour minimum wage in Florida, do you think it would have passed? No, because the partisan nature of all of this is once there's a partisan attachment to it, it's viewed completely differently. So we're at a point right now where it's not about policy and ideas and concepts, all right? It's about the R or the D. It's about the blue or the red.
I agree with you, Vin. And
yeah,
my big solution, honestly, if you turn off the fake news spigot somehow, right? Let's say magically you can snap your fingers and there's no more misinformation out there and there's no more intentionally lying to people about things. The reason why, Vin, that $15 an hour passes and what wouldn't if it was a Democrat saying it is because they're lied to about what Democrats want and what it's going to cost them and what that actually means. They're told that's socialism and that's all it takes. It is the red-blue thing. But I think if we could shut off the fake news spigot, those people wouldn't be duped quite so easily. That
could be.
Let me pick up what you both just said there is very important. The label is everything.
Yeah.
If you go back to, say, the Nixon days with détente or opening up détente, the SALT talks in 1972 with the Soviet Union, a Democrat, a liberal could never have signed that nuclear arms agreement, could not have opened up an agreement with China. It took a Republican, Nixon, because now the conservatives all love it because it's one of theirs, right? Now look at the Trump administration, the flip-flop on free trade. The conservative movement for a century, always free trade, free markets, free trade, get down the barriers. And then boom, Trump completely flip-flops. I've never seen anything like this, by the way. That was one of the pillars of conservatism. They completely abandoned that in favor of Trumpism, which is essentially a closed border, tariffs, trade war, nationalism. And again, to see that flip-flop is astonishing to me. So why did that happen? Why would conservatives completely flip-flop on this pillar of their philosophy?
Oh, it's easy,
Trump.
Nolan.
Donald Trump.
No, it's not Donald Trump.
They have no principles. That's what
it's not Donald Trump. It's two things. One is Barack Obama, because Barack Obama embraced free trade. These were his things, and the Republican Party's like, nope, we're against it because we're against Obama, and it sort of carried it out with them. But the second thing, and this is even more important, is from a policy standpoint. Right, from a policy standpoint, just think about Republican policy how Republican policies evolved over the last 20 years, 30 years, go back to 1980. The one constant in Republican policy has been cutting taxes. That's about it. That is their central core tenet and philosophy. Everything else about Republican policy since then has been about holding on to power. And they've actually come up with some innovative ideas in the midst. Like they came up with cap and trade as a way to address environmental concerns, and then ran away from that as soon as they realized Democrats liked it. They came away with Romney put in an interesting version of healthcare before Obamacare in Massachusetts. That was sort of a free market version of that, and they ran away from that. Right? Those are two interesting policy innovations that came out of the conservative sphere that they ran away from, because their core policy is cutting taxes, and then outside of that, their core policy is opposition. How do we stay in power? Right? And so they stay in power by gerrymandering, judges. Everything is about staying in power. It's not about implementing policy. They're for spending when they're in power. They're against spending when they're out of power. There's no intellectual consistency. There's no intellectual integrity to the thought process outside of taxes and staying in power. That's it. And so when you look at that and you wonder where we've evolved from and how we've gotten there, it isn't just Trump. Trump is the byproduct of all of this.
Trump is not an aberration. He's the culmination.
Yes.
And a lot of it comes from the messaging, like you've all been saying. So maybe
they're so good at messaging, and they're so good at fake news, and they don't have to care if they're telling the truth or not, whereas we care little. I'm not saying all Democrats are honest, because they most certainly are not. And there's a ton of scumbags out there too. But we try to be honest sometimes, which is way harder than just straight up lying about your opponent.
Yeah, I want to say also that Joe is absolutely correct. And one other thing that we have and this really is not a partisan, I've been very partisan on this show. I'm not always that way, but I certainly want to be today for, for obvious reasons. But, I'm sorry, Matt, I should throw it back to you on the election stuff. I was going to say something, and then I realized that we're going long on the
no problem.
So let me throw it back to you on the election and let you take this back, huh?
Sure. Well, just real quick, we were just talking about the messaging thing, so that kind of touched a nerve with me because, I mean, for the past few days, I mean, I've largely watched CNN, ABC News, but I flip it back to Fox News, every now and then just to see what I'm missing. I would say their election coverage was fine. I mean, it wasn't completely partial. Of course, there was a slant towards Trump, but this year, CNN didn't try to hide their slant towards Biden either. So, I mean, I was fine with that part of it. Here's what worries me, and it sounds like it worries all of you as well. You get to the opinion shows like Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham. And honestly, I was able to stomach like 5 minutes of each of those. I'm talking about in the past couple of days. They are still in full-scale attack mode, right? They are throwing out every conspiracy theory angle and seeing what sticks. And if you watch those shows right now, if you're just like had no idea what was going on in the United States, and that was the first thing you turned on right now, you would have every reason to believe that the election is literally being stolen from Donald Trump, right? And let's be honest, a majority of Fox News viewers are tuning in to watch the opinion shows, right? They're not there so much for the news. They want to watch Hannity and Ingraham and people like that. And that's the Trump echo chamber. And at least for now, in the immediacy of the election, it doesn't look like it's going away. Can it? Will it? Can that message change, or are we stuck with that from now on, do you think?
I'm going to throw a question out there that I don't want to have to answer, and nobody else has to, more of a rhetorical question. But like, when you talk about free speech, everybody agrees you shouldn't be able to yell fire in a crowded theater. The question I will pose is it any less dangerous to tell millions of people on television that your president is being overthrown and that election fraud and that this country is being torn apart? Is that any less dangerous to say stand back and stand by?
Linda, from a legal standpoint, I mean,
Yeah, there's an immediacy about the shouting fire in the crowded theater, where there's not necessarily an immediacy about the other. That becomes the issue. It's just like Bannon, right? Bannon, we're all familiar with Stephen Bannon this week. He called for the beheading, right, of Tony Fauci. My feeling is his bail should have been revoked immediately and he should have been arrested. But there are some problems with that because he's also saying it's a hyperbole for his show that he was dealing with. So, we go a long way to countenance and to, say, free speech is there because free speech is there's a reason for free speech. There's a reason why it's the number one amendment, right? Along with freedom of the press. It's the most important. So do I think it's going to eventually change? I think after the white generation, and I'm going to say that clearly, dies, right? We're here with this now. This is the
that's what I think too.
As soon as all the different formats are taking over, and you saw that Fox News had the highest ratings on the election coverage, right, than all the other networks, and that's because we all look at different things. We may be on Facebook watching something. We may be on the election. We may be online. And so until that whole TV clicker generation goes, I think that's going to be the way it is. Everything is going to be fractured.
I'd like to ask something to both of you. You said it's going to go away. I see it getting much worse. I think that's the issue here. You talked about echo chambers. Those echo chambers are going to have thicker walls probably after this election, I would think. I mean, we can be hopeful and extend olive branches and, do the kumbaya around a campfire. We can pretend that's going to happen. And let's hope it does, by the way, in some cases. It's not as though this is all a black or white issue. It could be a very gray issue where we pick up some pockets of cooperation. And, there's situations that that will have, I think a very good outcome, very positive outcome. But there's some other facets that could go quite the opposite direction. So the fear that I have is this sense of immediacy that Linda Kenney Baden talked about, where someone could literally put up a tweet and say, let's go and, cut off the head of the Michigan governor, and they storm the Capitol with guns. I'm being hyperbolic, by the way, a little bit there, but that kind of happened.
Not.
And so
you're not. And
is,
that's the problem, Nolan. It's just like if you have a domestic violence situation, right? Nothing really happens. You have an order on a piece of paper that is worthless, basically. And then when somebody gets killed, people get arrested. And it's going to take that for things to change. But I was talking about immediacy. I was talking not the messaging. I was talking about the ability to congregate, right, on one specific area, one specific channel. That is going to change. That there's no doubt about that. And that changes with the next generation. Also, remember, 2029, the white male becomes a minority person in the United States.
Is that bad though? Like in a sense, is that going to make white males freak out even more?
Yes.
Now we're the true underdogs of this story.
Why do you think that there's holding on to power right now? Right? Why is there gerrymandering right now?
I totally agree with you. I just think that this may not be the death rattle. Like it might still be like another 20 years from now. I do agree they're on their way out. I just don't know, is the kicking and screaming going to stop in 2029, or is it going to carry on another 50 years?
It may carry on another 20 years.
But
I think we're seeing a changeover.
I think Linda's onto something. I really do, and I agree with you a lot on this, Linda. Is that, I mean, and Joe, I understand what you're saying. There might be what they call the markets a dead cat bounce, where
I actually like the death rattle, Joe. I mean, you got into my area.
So the death rattle or a dead cat bounce or whatever you want to call it, but conceptually, when you think about it, we're getting to a point where Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Z are going to be making up the bulk of the electorate. They're going to be making up the bulk of the population. And the fact of the matter is that starting in 19...
Please tell me they're smarter. Please.
Yes, they are. They're fundamentally
I need some fucking good news.
Yeah, they're fundamentally
because the generation above us is so, Linda, no offense, but your peers are idiots.
Yeah, well we've been think about it since 1992. We've been relitigating the Vietnam War. All right, this is what we've been doing since 1992. We've taken the Vietnam War and right up until 72, 73, and we've been fighting every issue for 30 years. All right, we got to stop. Everything has been about that 5 to 10 year window. We have to freaking stop. And the only way we stop is when the people who are hung up on all those issues from 1968 to 1975 get out of power.
Or die, really.
Yes.
Well, I mean, when everybody talks about the white person vote, right? I mean, it's been disturbingly consistent, right? If you go back from 1976 all the way to, I don't have the numbers for 2020, but through 2016, the white male has averaged about 55% voting Republican and about 40% voting Democrat. And it's been very consistent, like a little bit of a bump for Obama and Clinton and a little bit of a bump on the other side for Reagan. But other than that, we're talking about a 40 plus year trend now. So I would like to think that it could change in 10 years. I mean, I understand that the 2029 statistic is a real thing, but it's also not a light switch either, that it's going to suddenly sway that trend, the degree that I think we might all want it to. Can we do something about that? That's a very general question, but I mean, how do you convince that 55% white male vote that they're possibly on the wrong side?
I'd like to address that a little bit. That we've had really watershed moments of what we call just absolute, where things come together for certain generations and then they don't change. The Great Depression made the working class of this country, both the rural working class and urban factory workers, Democrats, unions, New Deal, they were called New Deal Democrats, completely transformed American society. 50 years later, in 1980s, what happens? the Reagan Democrats, the Reagan Republicans, completely transforms and really takes over the working class, the middle class, white working class, particularly Americans who flip-flop from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. They've been very much in that camp ever since then. I would say, again, it happens. It's just I'm going to sound like Doris Kearns Goodwin here, the presidential historian or something, but or Robert Caro, who Linda Kenney Baden and I really love, somebody talking about these issues in context with history. But Trump is really the next transformative figure. And I don't mean that transformative does not mean necessarily good. Trumpism will live on. Trump won't live on, but his movement will. And this started, I'm going to go back all the way to the 1992 Republican National Convention. Pat Buchanan, who spoke at that convention, talked about, he used the phrase, "We have a cultural war in America." Anybody who remembers that convention, it was Pat Buchanan who stole the convention and essentially launched what became known as the Tea Party in America 10 years later. The Tea Party then morphs into this nationalistic, anti-immigrant, completely a fervent, pro-American, supposedly, obviously very Christian group. It's about 30% of the country, largely rural, certainly red state, largely based in the South. And then Trump essentially steps in to this vacuum because there's no one to fill that void. It certainly wasn't Mitt Romney, who was the presidential candidate in 2012. It wasn't John McCain. It wasn't even George W. Bush. There was a huge vacuum of conservatism, particularly white males, uneducated largely. And I don't mean that negatively, by the way. I have a great deal of respect, certainly liberals do, great deal of respect for working class people who I work with my hands, who do physical labor.
Typing doesn't count as working with their hands. No.
Celebrated. That's a good thing. I want to make that very, very clear here. But largely that demographic has shifted into the Trump camp. And the problem now is, how do you get them back? And once, these things have been ingrained over social media, over the people drinking at the bar and hearing how bad Nancy Pelosi is, it is just like it's very difficult to move people away from New Deal Democratism in the 1930s or Reagan Republicanism in the 1980s. It's going to be very difficult to shift these people off of their anchor beliefs in the Trump era.
I think everyone in this Zoom's thinking the same thing. Re-education camps, obviously. One in every county that voted red. Very gentle torture.
Waterboarding.
I'm going to jump in for 1 second just because it's 1 minute before 5. So I'm just sort of keeping an eye over your shoulder, Nolan, to see if and when the speech starts. It hasn't yet.
The motorcade is on its way.
Okay, so Vin, you've got an eye on it as well. Just feel free to jump in like when that starts and just let us know, and we'll, just take a break and come back to wherever we were before that. Where were we? Re-education camps. No,
re-education. I mean, Linda,
kidding.
Linda, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, because Nolan was tracing that history. And one of the interesting things I found in that history is the movement of the white working class from Democrat to GOP came as the African American vote moved from Republican to Democrat. These sort of intersected, and I don't think it's an accident. I mean, like the Nixon Southern strategy wasn't an accident. He saw these trends coming and moving forward, and the degree to which, and this is something you brought up earlier, the degree to which race is intertwined with it, and the degree to which we have a hard time talking about the degree to which race is intertwined with all of this, sort of makes it really hard to think about how to approach solutions.
And probably one of the lacking of our panel is that we don't have that diversity here to have that input, right? Tonight.
Sure.
And that's not a, that's something that could be remedied next time we talk, because I'm sure this.
I can go more militant on that front if you want.
yeah, okay, that'd be good. No, but no, seriously, we really need that input, because obviously, from everything that I see, you have the minority groups who really have come out and really pushed Biden over the line, right? I mean, he's loved. He's loved not because he's anti-Trump. He's loved because he was the vice president for President Obama, which is one of the reasons, that I think that we have this culmination in Donald Trump at this point too. But because it's a backlash against Obama, that's my feeling that the racism is so intertwined with what has happened in the past 12 years.
It is. It's 100%. I mean, just to offer that point of view, look, 10 years ago, I was told by a state trooper in North Carolina that if I drove 1 mile over the speed limit, he was going to run my ass into jail. All right, this was just 10 years ago. This is a fact that I have to live with. And, it's part of my life. I am used to being a part of my life. Look, Stacey Abrams, God bless her. You talk about the hard work that needs to be done to change a country, to change a state, to change a city. And she didn't do it the easy way, right? She built from the community and built from the ground up, registered voters, got them to vote, got them to care, got them to understand what the connection between their vote and what happened on a policy level, what happened at the state level, what happened at the local level. And she is not single-handedly, but she's the driving force behind what changed. Georgia, obviously there's some demographic changes there that coincided with it. But this is Stacey Abrams herself bringing in. She should be the next DNC chair. She'd be the head next to the DNC. Her skill set is perfectly suited for it. She understands how to build a voting organization, get people to care, connect with them, get them to come out to vote, connect policy. Well, this is exactly what the DNC should do. If Biden doesn't ask her to be the DNC chair, we should impeach him tomorrow. But it's one of those things where it's really important. But when you talk about the minority vote and you talk about it, look, I felt it distinctly when Obama was elected, right? There was, look, I beat the drum for the United States all over the world. I've lived overseas, I've worked overseas, and I do stuff there. I've always believed that the United States is the greatest country in the world. Obama, the day he was elected, that was special. Because it gave voice to something that I didn't believe in when I was growing up, which is I could have done that. And so to me, that was special. And to me, watching Mitch McConnell, the day he's getting elected, or not even before he's elected, saying our goal is to make him a one-term president. There was no concept of reaching out and working with him and all of this sort of stuff. It's just like, you can't even recognize the importance of the moment and even pretend to try and work with them.
Vin, I thought that the second term was important. I said, because I was like, this country's never going to elect a black man president again. It's just not going to happen. So when he got elected the second time, I said, boy, has this country changed? It was
Racism's over. We did it.
We did it. And then here we are.
Yes, we could.
Here we are.
Yeah. So look, race plays a role in it. It absolutely does. I don't spend a lot of time talking about race because no one wants to hear me talk about it. And so I just don't do it. It doesn't do me any good to talk about it. But it is a constant presence in our politics. It is a constant presence in our life. And, I have to worry about those sorts of things, but it's all right. I'm used to it. But the idea, and this is why when we go back to what I talked about earlier about the politics of unity and that sort of thing, after the votes got text messages saying, well, we've got to reach out to the other side and all this sort of stuff. And part of me is like, we're right. We do have to reach out to the side and do all those other things, but part of me is mad saying, wait a minute, why is it always me reaching out to the other side? When the hell has anyone ever reached out to me and said, you want to know what? I care about what you think. I care about your vote. It never happens.
There's a million think pieces every election is like get inside the mind of a Trump voter. How to appeal to the right. They never write articles about conservative policy. Be like, hey, here's how you appeal to people. Here's how you appeal to liberals. Here's how you appeal to college educated people. Like there's none of that. It's always moving one direction.
Yeah, it is, as a person of color, it is very frustrating. And so, yeah, I mean, would it be, so yes. All right. I've done my bit for the diversity part.
No, I mean, and also I know it was sort of a figure of speech that you were saying, but I mean, at least speaking for us, I think, I mean, we are interested in hearing about this. I mean, please do feel free to talk about the issues that you're talking about as much as you want. You mentioned Mitch McConnell, and obviously that was a very polarizing moment, in our history. What about him right now, right? He couldn't work with Obama. It feels like that was very racially motivated. We'll never maybe know entirely for sure, but it feels like either let's say it, he was either racist himself, or he felt like he was representing a racist population, of his constituents. So he felt like that was the right thing to do politically for whatever reason. So now,
has he reached out? Has Mitch McConnell even tweeted or reached out to President-elect Biden? I don't see anything today.
He hasn't, but
Certainly
at least
nothing.
he's mentioned like the election's gonna stand, right? Kind of.
Has he?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything out of McConnell, but I
I
haven't
don't
been
know.
looking.
Because I've been away from it, I'm only getting like secondhand things. But a friend of mine was like, "No, like McConnell's even distancing himself from Trump now."
Look,
as a conjecture of what there will be going forward, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, look. After
positive first step.
Look, I've been on Twitter and analyzing votes for the entire week. Anyone I've lost so many Twitter followers over the last week. It's not funny. And the funny thing is.
Well, you got one today, Vin. What's your handle?
Yeah, but
what's your handle, Vin? We'll follow you.
Vinistic. But the funny thing is, I wasn't even that partisan on Twitter. I was just counting votes. And counting votes isn't it's not political. It's math. And people didn't like it. But when Biden won, I called my parents. My parents were thrilled, and they were happy. My brother called up, did a Zoom call with some friends who were also thrilled. And then I went and got a vegan Philly cheesesteak and a pecan pie, and I brought it back. I ate it, went for a run, and now I'm here. But
vegan a vegan Philly cheesesteak is
maybe
the most liberal cuck. Just won the election food I can possibly imagine.
I'm a vegetarian.
That is fantastic.
Joe, he's an immigrant, okay?
He's an immigrant. It's vegan. If only somehow it could have also been lesbian. You would have hit everything.
But I'm just a lesbian trapped in a man's body. Come on.
There it is.
But yeah, so it was such a relief to not have to think about what Mitch McConnell's going to say. And it was such a relief not to have to think about, all right, what are the million ways this could go wrong? And it was so nice just to be able to walk down the street and feel a little freer, just to walk down the street and not feel that weight. Even if it was just for a couple of hours, it just felt so damn good.
Yeah, I'd like to say this, Vin. What you say there, gives me a little bit of a tear I tear up a little bit. Let me tell you, it reminds me of something. When the election was called today, most of the networks kind of did it at the same time. I had CNN on, and Van Jones comes on around, I think it was, 10:30 in the morning, 11. And there was a weight of the moment that all of us watching for the last several years, but particularly the last 5 years, were waiting to spike the ball across the goal line. And here it was. This was the second. Now we're really not in the end zone legally or officially, but I think that was still the moment that we're going to remember is we finally did it. So Van Jones is live on CNN. And sometimes you come across an extraordinary moment, not in television, but just in life. And Van Jones tears up. I'm going to tear up even thinking about this. He talked about his kids and how difficult it was to tell his children and people that around him, that this country is not like that. It's not like what you're seeing in the White House on Twitter from this president. We're better than that. We've got to be better than that. And so Van Jones went on for about 2 minutes, broke down crying. I was crying. I'm sorry. I looked at my wife. She was crying.
Cried.
I teared up.
Cried watching it.
And
yeah.
because and here's the thing.
Yep.
Here's the thing. I'm watching this and I'm spiking the ball, and I could be a total prick. I know that. I'm the biggest prick on earth when I get on a roll. I know that.
Tracks.
But you know what? That was, by the way, nobody corrected me there, I noticed.
That story checks
That was
out.
one of those moments where I didn't understand the gravity of that moment until I saw Van Jones talking about how important that was for him, this moment. And then Van did it. Now Vin does it here about just walking down the streets tomorrow. It's a different day than yesterday. At least internally, you can hold your head up a little higher.
Well
I
said.
think we were all watching that. That was quite a moment, especially since he told Rick Santorum to stop, if you recall, right? Santorum was going on and he just told him to stop, and he took over the conversation and then went to that. It really was quite a moment.
When he said being a good person matters, that's when I was like, that's what this has all been for me. Like you have to be a good person. What the actual fuck has been going on? And
so Joe, let me kind of turn this to the thing that Matt was talking about earlier. I'm sorry, and I really want to know the answer to this. I want to know how I can do it, how we can do it. How do you look at those people that were on the other side of this issue? And yeah, we're still going to, deal with them and talk. It's not like it's, I mean, of course you're going to, but how can you regain love, trust, appreciation, respect for 71 million people? By the way, help me with that, please.
I don't think you have to regain any of those things. All you have to do is not treat them badly. Mm-hmm. And that might be difficult enough for some people. But I did not feel nearly the smug satisfaction that I thought I would. I felt good. I haven't felt the need to be particularly smug on social media yet, or go to particular people. And I realized what it is that I very few of them, I can't say none, very few of them do I want to hurt. I don't mean I want to hurt them. I mean, I don't want them to have feelings of hurt. I don't want them to be worried. I don't want them to be sick to their stomach about the president the way I was, even though I'm incredibly angry with them and wish I could snap my fingers and make them wake up and think, but I don't want them to feel pain, most of them. And so
wait, I may have to stop you right there.
Sure.
Feel pain as long as it's internalized, not that you're going to give them pain, because I don't want you to, there's something called the Fifth Amendment. Maybe you should take it.
Of course. No, I'm saying I don't want that.
Just check. Just making it clarify.
Yes. But even the people that I do want to feel pain, I don't want to inflict that pain. I want them to suffer for what they've done, what I think they've done. But even still, if they don't, fine. As long as things get better. That's it. That's all I care about. I don't need vengeance. I want to get occasional good shot in because I'm a comedian and I want to make a good joke when I can. So today when I tweeted, my tweets did this, that's about all of the grave dancing I'm going to do.
And the liberal coastal elite about my food was a good joke. I loved it.
I'm going to do my Bernie Sanders. Can I do my Bernie Sanders with the finger? And I got to ask this to Linda. And by the way, I know how you're going to answer, but I'd still like you to justify this. Here in Nevada, where I live, I've been watching these Republican attorneys coming in and taking every single minuscule, frivolous case of supposedly voter fraud. Every time they find a trash bag blowing across a parking lot, they think it's a Republican ballot, and it ends up being an In-N-Out burger wrapper. I'm not making that up.
For those of people on the East Coast,
photographs.
In-N-Out Burger is a franchise that does not exist on the East Coast. Okay,
it's delicious.
So in Nevada, you have to live in a state that's contested, and
they don't have veggie burgers.
That's going on in this city, and I've been down there in North Las Vegas at the courthouse and seen this stuff, and I've watched it, and so I'm in the middle of all of this. Maybe you're not. You live out there you live out there in New York City.
My vote didn't count, right? I'm here in New York State.
But here's what I want to ask you about going after on social media, which I've done and I've gotten in trouble for, going after the people who are the proponents of these frivolous lawsuits, of the lies, who retweet Alex Jones, who tell the lies, who completely fan the flames. Doesn't somebody have to stand up to that and call those people out?
Well, you know
Olive Branch my ass. Somebody better
think about it.
correct those people. Am I wrong about that?
I don't know.
Sandy Hook parents who lost children, young children, have had to sue him, right? And get a judgment against him and all. I cannot think of a worse situation that aggrieved parents whose kids were shot when they went to school when they were young.
Yes, and just a second, Linda, and they're doing it Alex Jones in Nevada and trying to lay this stuff. It's essentially an act of sedition to try to delegitimize this election. And that's all you're going to see on conservative media, particularly far right-wing, Breitbart and all these bullshit sites, Conservative Treehouse. Go there and look at their pages. Voter fraud, voter fraud, voter fraud.
I think what Nolan's saying.
Hamburger wrapper. It's a ballot for Trump blowing across a parking lot.
Right, and you have the poll worker.
Doesn't that have to be fought?
You have the counter, not the poll worker. You have the counter in Atlanta who had to go into hiding because while everything is being filmed, right? Because most of these are live streaming. He kind of, I don't know, threw it on the ground. It turns out it was an instruction. And then he was accused on these sites of throwing away a ballot, and he was doxxed on social media, and he's in hiding. And again, we don't do anything about it unless he gets killed.
You got to start treating the internet like the dangerous weapon that it is. I don't know what the answer is, but it keeps coming back to that. If there were consequences for doing this to a person, people would do it less often. Doxing a human being and getting them death threats, again, I don't know what, but we're at a really crucial time where that was never capable before. And you can yell fire with maybe not the exact sense of urgency, but reach way more people and be way more credible than just a voice in a movie theater.
Yeah.
The problem is you have the establishment doing it, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the GOP doing it. They want power.
Senators,
they don't care
presidents,
about anything
party,
else. They
everybody.
don't care about truth.
Yeah.
And so once the establishment doing, who's going to keep the establishment in check? Look, many of our police, many in our military are involved in these white supremacist groups. I went to a lecture about 10 years ago out of Georgia, actually, where one of the prosecutors there was talking about one of the biggest problems they have is that you have the people engaged in law enforcement that are part of the problem. So if that's the case, what do we do about it? It's like if you were in Nazi Germany and you were Jewish and you wanted to go get someone to stop because some other Nazi was breaking your glass or stealing your art, you get arrested. We're almost in that situation right now. I'm not comparing us to Nazi Germany. I don't think that is quite right. But what I'm saying to you is that the people in power are 50% of what's at 70 million people are creating the problem.
Okay, I can tell what Nolan and Linda are saying right now is, and if you guys want to be camp counselors at the re-education camps, if that's what you're trying to say, look, I think the camps are a bad idea, but if that's the only solution.
Hey, Joe, I want to ask you something because you are for those of you who don't know, Joe, he is a comedian. But I've seen your stand-up act, seen you on YouTube. Check out Joe Stapleton. No, really, you are just marvelous. And I wonder this, and I've talked to some other comedians that do what you do, and I've asked this, and I'd like to hear your answer. And that's being funny in the Trump era, or particularly making fun of Trump. And if you recall, like, there's a thing called the White House Correspondents' Dinner that was always a big tradition going back 50 years. Even presidents come to this every year and make fun of themselves. It's always been and this is kind of a symbol of presidents and the media and everyone kind of letting their hair down. And well, Trump has not had any of those in 4 years because he's incapable of laughing at himself. And our self-deprecation. And we've been in this very combustible, incendiary type atmosphere where it's very difficult. And I've watched so-called Trump humor, late night comedians trying to be funny about Donald Trump. They did this with Clinton and the sex scandal, or George W. Bush, who had his faults. Every president is made fun of. I've never found Trump funny, making fun of Trump funny. It was too serious for me. It was just too painful. I thought this issue was so serious that I didn't find humor about Trump.
That's not why, Nolan,
I want to
actually.
get to that. Is that going to change now for you?
Well, that's not why you didn't laugh, actually, because you're capable of laughing at things that you take very seriously. You are, you know it. You could pretend not, but you could potentially laugh at a dead baby joke or a whatever joke, right? Like, we all have that ability. The problem with right-wing comedy, and Danny Zucker explains to me, you weren't laughing because it was too serious for you. You're laughing because comedy has to have an air of truth to it. And when you're watching something that you so vehemently disagree with, it doesn't have that little bit of truth to it. You're like, this is a fabrication. Like, this isn't a good joke because there's nothing about this that is real. That's why right-wing comedy shows die on the vine all the time. There's nothing true about them. They're making up setups and punchlines.
Wow.
Interesting.
So I'm sorry, following up, is this a better time for you now then? Getting back to,
People always say like, oh God, well, Trump must be good for comedy. And I'm like, yeah, and 9/11 was like really good for ambulances, right? Like, they would rather not have the business. Nobody like runs the ambulance company. It's like, fuck, 9/11 is a tragedy, but we made a killing that day, right? Like, I would rather have less material to work with and not think about the president ever than have him occupy my every thought. Yes, he's an easy target. And yes, laughing at him and making fun of him and seeing the day's jokes about him is probably one of the only things that got me through the last 4 years, but I am fucking sick of it. I never did any, I did a little bit of Trump material in my act during the last election. And the second he won, I never told another Trump joke again on stage.
And Joe, is it also because he doesn't laugh? I mean, George Bush had a kind of self-deprecating humor because he has no humor. And he doesn't
There's no humor at
funny?
all. He doesn't laugh at anything, not just at himself. Think about one time you've actually seen him laugh, like a picture of his head thrown back. Like, there aren't any. He doesn't have that emotion. I don't know. People throw the word sociopath around a lot. Like, he probably is. Like, he just doesn't connect with human beings on an emotional level, whether he's talking to a widow or to somebody that's escaped a war zone or, someone being gracious to him, even laughter, none of those things where you connect with human beings. He doesn't seem to possess any of them.
Linda, let me ask you a question, if I may, and we may get cut short by the Biden speech. If that happens, we'll just come back to it.
This is not a good start to the presidency. 23 minutes late, Joe. I don't know what they do. Maybe in New York City.
It's that Delaware traffic,
But in the heart of America, we're on time.
Yeah, that Wilmington downtown.
That's right.
Yeah.
Downtown is 3 streets.
So, all right. So Nolan, it is spiking the ball. If you happen to hear what we said last week, and I was like, please don't spike the ball yet. So I'm not trying to be negative, but I am trying to be a realist, or actually come to you for more of a realistic idea of how I should feel over the next few weeks. Because I mean, it's a legitimate fear from Biden supporters that the results of the election will somehow be placed in the hands of the Supreme Court, right? And Trump has been known throughout his life. Like, Nolan and I lived in Atlantic City in the 1990s. We go way back with Trump.
I did not know that. You lived in New Jersey?
I did. I grew up in
smoke them if you got them.
I grew up in the Bronx.
I was born in Jersey.
A Bronx tale.
Yeah.
I also lived in New Jersey for a year. Linda, are you part of the New Jersey club?
We're all New Jersey.
Jersey. Yeah.
Jersey.
Oh my God.
I've never had a vegan cheesesteak though. Anyway, so he's been known to muddy the water with legal battles his whole existence. Not necessarily to win them, because he doesn't win hardly any of them, but just sort of in the hopes that the other side stops fighting. And obviously nobody's going to stop fighting this time. But the question is, could he muddy the waters enough to force the Supreme Court to rule on the election outcome? And if
I
that
think-
happens, how worried should we be?
Hold on a second. I thought I just saw a tad of this thing starting, but maybe
Okay.
not.
No,
Yeah.
not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm on YouTube TV, so I might be 15 to 20 seconds behind, but I don't see anything yet.
Okay. All right. No, I'm just on his website, and there was a flash, and then it went off.
Linda, how
Could
much
he
trouble
not even-
can Trump make for us?
Okay.
Basically.
All right. My understanding, okay, and just from talking to different people, is one of the reasons. I mean, we all knew that Joe Biden really had to win Pennsylvania. At least we all knew that before Georgia and all, right? Until the landscape got changed. But everyone thought the blue wall was going to be where Biden had to go, right? He had to reinstate a win in Pennsylvania. So the gambit was that they just started, okay? Can we talk about this? And
Absolutely,
Kamala Harris
absolutely.
When we come back?
Yes,
Guys, if I come back
please.
with tears in my eyes, don't make fun of me.
No, I'm not, because I do want to talk about the glass ceiling too, because I think this is an extraordinary event.
Yeah, and don't worry, I'm going to close the show with tear in my eyes, so it'll all work out.
All right.
Okay, well, they're showing
let's
the
all
Chase Center, Biden, Harris right now.
All right, let's all
We're
reconvene.
going to jump right back. I'm going to leave this open.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just
just
jump
leave it
right
open.
back on as soon as he's off stage. We come back.
Sounds
Okay.
good. Well,
Okay.
it's going to be both of them. I don't know who's. I assume
Oh,
Kamala
sorry,
Harris
okay.
is speaking first, but
First,
then
yeah.
Once the man's
Once
done,
they're
we're
both
back
done.
on here, though, right? We're
Not
Once
that
they're both
everybody's
done.
paying attention here, but I'm going to turn the volume up here, okay?
all right, just in
Okay,
case you
I'm
stay
just going to
here.
stop my video and mute my sound and listen to it.
All right, see you
Okay,
guys
bye.
in a little bit.
See you soon.
He will speak. There's going to be a lot of music we're going to be hearing as well. Let's listen to some of that.
I agree that under normal circumstances, I wish God would just be left out of all of politics. But in this particular instance, I felt like it was a good contrast, like you said, to the way that Trump would just, parade the Bible out there and act as if he gave a shit what was inside it. And, Biden could very easily and naturally just recite a hymn. By all means, I give him that. Like, please do that. But
And remember, he's going to be this. I'm sorry,
ahead,
man.
Linda.
go ahead,
He's
Linda.
going to be the second Catholic president. And we all know that he goes to church every Sunday, and it's real. It's not Trump just making an appearance at some ceremony. It's real for him. I
in
always
his
say
Catholic church, so he really believes it, because if you're
He
still a
really-
Catholic at this point, you better fucking believe it.
Yeah, well, the people who have losses he's had, and I can't imagine having the kind of loss that he's had with his first wife and his kid, his daughter, and I just can't imagine it. That if you're grounded, if your faith can ground you, fabulous. I mean, I'm not that person, but he is, and we know he is, and it's not phony, right?
No,
Not only is it not phony, when we talked about reaching out to other people earlier in the show, part of the reaching out to people is to reaching out to people of faith, for whom faith plays a much larger and more central role, not just in their private discourse, but their public discourse.
Yep.
And for a president of the United States to be able to stand up and do that in a way that allows him to connect with people of faith who are comfortable and want to see that out of their president, out of their leader. It is yet another way in which, I mean, to a certain degree, Biden was sort of built for this time. There are a lot of people that didn't want Biden to be the Democratic nominee for a variety of reasons, and we don't need to relitigate that. But there is something interesting to how uniquely suited he is for this moment in time. He built a career on reaching out to everyone. He is able to speak and reach people in a way that that outside of the core base of the Democratic Party, that a lot of people just aren't capable of doing. And it might, in the end, it might not mean anything. And in the end, it might not amount to something. But at the same time, at least we feel like we're taking a shot at this, and he's uniquely suited to take a shot at it.
I saw some real Claudius potential with Joe Biden, like just the guy who you never really thought that much of him, and never really seemed that fit to lead and was kind of a failure in a lot of ways. You know, he's run for, I think, president before multiple times.
This is his third time.
Yeah. And then I see him in this moment and I'm like, what if he just ends up being one of these guys in the history books that you read about that like everyone underestimated him and came into office in the lowest point the country had seen in years and just knocks it out of the park. Like that's possible. Like I saw that possibility watching this tonight and I haven't felt that way in a long time.
Yeah. No, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, look, he might end up with what, 306 electoral votes, which is the exact same number as President Trump had. You know, a lot of that's still to be determined. The amount of votes he has, he does have a mandate of sorts, and you know, we haven't gotten into the election results yet because to me the biggest story isn't Biden winning, but what happened and the rest of the ticket and that sort of thing. But he does have a mandate of sorts, and his mandate is quite clear. Is, you know, it's all right. Let's deal with COVID, but more importantly, let's lower the heat, let's lower the temperature, and let's bring a little bit of humanity back to all of this. And if he succeeds at that, at nothing else, 4 years from now, we will be in a much better place than we are now. And the idea that we can sit here and say that now is just sort of refreshing and remarkable.
Yep.
And he's got look, also we've got the glass ceiling broken, right? I mean, you talk about this, it's not insignificant that Kamala Harris is his vice president elect now. You know, it just, and look at the family up there. If you're all looking at your TV, let's look at this family. They exude love, they exude happiness. They're just exuding, you know, and they're masked. You know?
Yeah, and they're masked.
Feeling.
Well, it is, but think about the symbolism behind Kamala Harris. I mean, first of all, the white pantsuit, and I'm not here to pay fashion critic or anything like that, but symbolizing the suffragette movement,
right.
And cracking that glass ceiling. And so that in and of itself is remarkable and sort of a subtle message, is a subtle messaging that a lot of people get. And the way she was able to speak to the experiences of women and women of color and bring that into the forefront and into the conversation. And once again, I didn't feel like it was an in-your-face sort of thing, but she was able to celebrate it. And it deserves to be celebrated because this is an incredible moment. And I'm just distracted by Nolan's guest. But it's so remarkable that we're in this moment where the first female vice president, the first, you know, African-American vice president, the first, you know, the first South Asian woman vice president, the daughter of immigrants. It is so remarkable, and it shows you the promise of the moment where we are in the country and what the people voted for.
And we don't look at Dr. Jill Biden. Don't you love Dr. Jill Biden? I mean, talk about a difference in first lady. We're talking about presidents. What a difference in first lady. She'll make. I hope she makes, you know, a significant movement. She's an educator. I mean, what a difference.
Yeah.
And maybe Melania will like hire her to do Christmas this year.
After she files for divorce.
I'm stopping being catty.
And we don't want this moment taken away from us. So please reassure us, Linda, that this moment will not be taken away
like we left off on a cliffhanger.
Yes.
Well, yes. What can happen? Okay, so you saw that the Trump campaign joined forces with some of the Republicans out in Arizona on the Sharpie thing, the Sharpie lawsuit, saying that those Sharpie ballots should not have been thrown out. That's going nowhere. The reason why is those ballots have been separated from the envelopes. They will never be able to tell who those ballots were for, to be able to go back and try to find voter intent, even assuming that was wrong. And it's not, because remember, a lot of these secretaries of state, or whatever you want to call them, some of them, they're election commissioners in each state that has a different title. A lot of them are Republican, right? And they're defending, they're saying, hey, this is our procedure. We're defending it because it's important for them to defend their own people, not necessarily Trump. So let's go back to what he can do. The big thing is Pennsylvania, right? The Pennsylvania gambit. That's why he wanted Amy Coney Barrett in there. In case they had to go to the Supreme Court, he thought he'd be assured that she would be ruling with the justices he thought were on his side, because he's not too sure about John Roberts. So he wanted to make sure that if he got there through Pennsylvania. So what happened? I have to go back a little historical, and there was an article written by my colleague at Law and Crime.
How much are you charging us per hour for this research?
Yeah, I know. Laura Nanos. And remember the case Bush versus Gore? You remember that case?
I was a kid, basically, but yes, I remember it.
In theory, that wasn't supposed to be a precedent for anything, was it, Linda?
It wasn't, but because it relied on Florida's state law that said the election results really have to be certified by December 8th, okay? So what happened there? Just in a nutshell, what happened there is there was back and forth on election night, whether or not it was going to be called for Gore, Bush, Gore, Bush, Gore, Bush. And as a matter of fact, Gore had to take back his phone call to Bush to say, hey, wait a second, I actually may have won Florida, maybe you lost. But in any event, it resulted that night that Bush was in the lead, right? So as a result of that lead, which was very small, under 2,000 votes, there was an automatic recount that Gore was entitled to in Florida. And I have to go back to this because this lays into Pennsylvania. So that recount happened, and then it showed that Bush was only in the lead by something like under 400 votes, which allowed Gore to say, now I'm entitled to what is called a manual recount versus the automatic recount, which goes to the machines. So Gore picked, because you have to pay for it, 5 counties to say, this is what I want recounted. The procedure for the recount in those 5 counties was all different. It was all over the place, but they were all manual. What happened was this had dragged on, and so the recounts could not be done by the mandated date of December 8th. And that's because electors then have to be chosen. Well, electors are already chosen, but electors have to vote and all. And so it just couldn't be done. It just wasn't able to be finished. So on December 9th, the Bush campaign filed suit and said, hey, you got to stop this recount because that's it. Recount's not finished. I'm the winner. It's a very technical procedure thing. That went up to the United States Supreme Court, and 7 of the justices said, yeah, okay, you're right. This wasn't done on time, but now what do we do about it? So what they decided to do about it, 5 of them would say, that's it. Whatever the count was on December 8th, that's it. And the count was that Bush was ahead, right? Therefore, he took Florida. So there's a very minor technical situation, really, because the count couldn't be finished by the state mandated law. Therefore, Bush was entitled to have the count as it was on December 8th, period. End of result, right? So what the Trump campaign is hoping is that the same thing happens in Pennsylvania, because that's the mother of the votes, of the electoral votes. So they're going to try to file suit and say, if indeed they can get a recount, that obviously there should be a mandatory recount, and then there should be a manual recount if he's close. I'm not sure he's close. I don't think that he's close, which is why the networks are waiting to call for that 5%. Remember, we were all crazy. Call the election, call the election, call the election. But there has to be a 5% differential to do that, to get that automatic recount, which I don't think there is, but we don't quite know yet, right? Because not all the ballots will be finished in terms of the provisional ballots, probably until Monday or Tuesday. If he doesn't get that, then he's got to show voter fraud. I don't think he can show voter fraud. So I think that the Biden campaign's in pretty good shape right now, and I think that's what the lawyers are going to advise here. And remember, Trump doesn't have great lawyers. I mean, Bush had great lawyers. Let's face it, he had a great lawyer team. So I think we're pretty safe. But obviously, there was some concern because some of the state legislatures in Pennsylvania tried in September or October to get a law passed that said, hey, you don't have to certify our results to January 1st, hoping that there wasn't going to be that close race and that they'd be stuck with the December 8th limitation that was in Florida for Bush versus Gore. I don't know if that is simple or explains it to you, but I think we're in good shape.
Can I build on that a little bit, Linda? Which is to
Yeah.
say that
Please.
there's something else that we're in really good shape on in terms of the Pennsylvania count, is that typically in recounts, you're only clawing back 500 votes, 600 votes. And the margins in Pennsylvania as they stand right now are high enough that, all right, you claw back 500 votes. Heck, you claw back 10,000 votes, which would be highly unusual.
The most amount of votes anyone's ever gotten back ever.
Ever.
Right.
And the president-elect still wins. And so that's why the margins, there matter so much, right? If you're talking about, if you're talking about Georgia being the state that put them over the top and the difference between winning or losing, then we'd be talking about a whole different game, because there a recount is within the realm of possibility of changing things, especially because we don't know what the provisional ballots in Georgia look like and all sorts of stuff. It's going to be a really narrow margin, but because of the margin, and it's just really hard.
So he's got a high margin in Pennsylvania, a high margin in Nevada, Arizona looking pretty good. Georgia's the only one that's truly close. Does he wave a white flag at some point? I mean, does somebody advise him that, I mean, he personally doesn't give up too easily, but is somebody close to him going to be like, look, this just isn't happening. It's going to make you look worse. I mean, what do you think happens here?
I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, he doesn't wave the white flag, but at some point, people are going to say, hey, wait a second, we don't have any chance. So we don't have any shot of this. And we've already had 8 lawsuits, and 7 of them we've been thrown out of court on. And only one that they said, could we get 6 feet within 6 feet instead of 25 feet of the ballots? I don't see it. I think at some point he's going to wave the white flag.
I think he'll put up a minimal legal fight, but because he is not, I think he's an incredibly dumb person, but he's not dumb when it comes to money and does not like wasting money. And I think he will stop wasting money relatively quickly, but will continue to fight it verbally forever. He will never give up that there was some kind of fraud or recount should have happened, but he knows the reality of the situation and will stop paying it anything other than lip service and riling people up, I think, very quickly.
So do we have any hopes of a peaceful transfer of power then?
Yeah, I think yes, because I think ultimately, here's why. He's a horrible person. I think he might be one of the worst people in the world. But ultimately, he's a coward. He is a coward. And any time that the screws have really been put to him, which is why I actually find think about all the things he's done wrong. He only ever hints at it, right? Hints at it, wink and a nudge, the racism, the white supremacy, wink and that's cowardly. That just own it. Like, just don't deny it. Don't just be what you are. And so I think that when it comes down to brass tacks, when it comes down to, is he actually going to have to say, I'm a dictator now? I don't think he'll do it. I think he's a coward.
And there was something earlier, I think just before we got on the air, that he put out through the Fox News sources, said that he's willing to do a peaceful transition under certain circumstances. So that's the first little glitch that we've gone past. But it also shows you, I think what's so important is that it was important for Joe Biden to be ahead in these races, Matt and Vin and Joe. It was very important for him to be ahead, because if the shoe were on the other foot and we were fighting, right?
Yep.
We'd be in the position of Al Gore.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think you both eloquently stated it. To me, what's interesting is the definition of a peaceful transfer of power. Is a peaceful transfer of power the president, exiting office, as expected, or is a peaceful transfer of power an organized transition? or is a peaceful transfer of power the president, an incumbent president, recognizing that the people are spoken and governing in a way that is consistent with a transition of power coming up? And so it's sort of a huge range of possibility there. So do I think that the military is going to have to escort President Trump from the building when his term is up? No.
Please, I want to see that though.
Yeah,
Yes,
that would be pretty awesome.
I would love to see that as well. Do I do that? Do I think he's going to have try and get helicopter directly to Florida so SDNY can't arrest him and charge him with something? Possibly.
Yeah.
But more importantly is what happens, and I don't want to talk about it today because it should be like a day of celebration. But when you talk about peaceful transfer of power, what are the things he does over the next 2 months that are clearly inconsistent with the direction the country's moving, with the goals of the country, the goals of the next administration, that sort of thing, where, do we get the Stephen Miller extravaganza of executive orders, and that sort of thing that has to all be undone and tied up in court and litigation, and just all of these sorts of things that now that he has no check on power, he doesn't have to worry about.
Is he basically going to slap lawsuit the country?
Yeah, just slash and burn his way out of town. I
Yeah.
mean, he didn't pay a deposit when he moved in, so you just sort of go on the way out the door. And
Well, maybe
so
a
to
little
me,
burning of that decoration wouldn't be such a bad idea in there.
yeah.
Can I interrupt and read something to you all?
Please.
I'd like to
Oh,
read
something bad
something. It
happened?
probably takes a minute and a half or so.
Oh.
You don't know where this is from. You don't know who this is about. I'm going to read it to you and tell you a little story. This is from the book that I'm holding, and I'll show it in a moment. My Secret Service protection had ended at noon, but I had my official car and chauffeur until midnight. John Wardlaw had been my driver for almost 8 years, and I asked him if he would mind coming back after dinner for one last ride through the city. The streets of Washington were snarled with traffic, made worse by the snow and ice. Hundreds of cars and rented limousines were lined up outside the hotels, waiting to pick up men in tails and women in long gowns on their way to inaugural balls. No one noticed us as we drove past the White House and headed through the streets toward Capitol Hill. I asked John, my driver, to park in the space reserved for the vice president's car, and I got out and walked up some broad stone stairs. A surprised guard let us in, and I walked past the entrance to the Senate chamber and drove down the long corridor to the rotunda, the dome of the Capitol rising above it. The only sound was the echo of my heels on the bare stone floor. That was written by Richard Nixon, 1960. I have an autographed copy, by the way. He signed it, show it right here. He signed it on May 1st, 1988 to me. It's Richard Nixon's memoirs, which I hold up here. Memoirs of Richard Nixon. In 1960, Richard Nixon was faced with a dilemma as to whether he should contest the closest election at the time in presidential history, one of the closest. And Richard Nixon, for the sake of the country, Richard Nixon conceded and didn't ask for a recount, didn't sue anybody, didn't have his lawyers chasing phantom voter fraud all over the country. Richard Nixon! And 14 years later, of course, he was faced with another dilemma. 14 years later, and he flew off and resigned and showed as much grace under the circumstances as he possibly could. Now let's contrast that with today and what we have still in the White House. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived by what we've just watched. It's not over. And I think that's the point that you all have been talking about. Even the people that a lot of the left vilify, Richard Nixon showed more class than the person that's currently in the White House and has yet, after 4 days, to make any kind of concession speech whatsoever or exhibit any sense of responsibility and respect for the constitutional and the peaceful transfer of power. Not a single shred of evidence. Nothing except tweets and divisiveness and falsity and fraud and stirring up hate. Yes, let's bring this country together. Yes, but let's don't forget the objective, the battle, the war is not done.
Where's the backbone of his party? I mean, Richard Nixon, when it was time to step down, had people in his ear telling him it was time to step down. Where are those people now? I mean, there's a few quiet, muted voices, but
well, it was the famous, and Nolan and Linda can probably address this better than the rest of us, but it was the famous Barry Goldwater going down Pennsylvania Avenue, leading his colleagues, from the Senate and the Hill, going over to them and going over to Richard Nixon, say, "Hey, it's time. You've lost the country. It's time for you to go." But part of the reason that worked, just from a historical standpoint, is Richard Nixon was a president that believed in the institutions of government, believed in the norms of government, even as, he would flagrantly violate them. He just had a general respect and belief in those norms. And so people making that walk down and saying, "Hey, it's time to go," would have an impact. I think Joe touched on it when he was talking earlier, and I wish I'd thought of it. It's like it's the smartest thing I've ever heard when it comes to the transfer of power stuff. Trump's realization isn't going to be about the norms of the country being violated or anything like that. It's going to be when he realizes this is costing him more money than it's worth, and at that moment, that's when this switch will flip, and who knows when we get to that moment. But in terms of the party doing it, no. And that's why I think the election results are so important, because we've been talking about the presidency the entire time. And if you take a look at what happened down ballot, it's actually a much more fascinating discussion. Not a single House seat was flipped. One Senate seat in terms of control of the Senate, plus one, maybe. With Alabama, you get another one. Maybe you get to 50-50 if you're super lucky, and that didn't happen. So it's not like the message from the American people was a repudiation of the last 4 years. It was, let's get rid of this guy. We are tired of him. And I've spent a lot of time going through the numbers. We don't have to dive into the numbers here. I've got some theories about it, but ultimately, what it was is the Republicans down ballot outperformed the president. And this was a repudiation of the morality and the behavior of the president, but it wasn't a repudiation of everything else that went with it. And so that's sort of the reality that we're facing moving forward. And so, and how we navigate that is kind of tricky. And because it wasn't a complete repudiation, how many of these people want to put their political careers on the line and make that trip up Pennsylvania Avenue and do it? When, Joe, you're 100% right. It's a lot easier for them politically and emotionally, for that matter, to wait for Trump to reach his own conclusion. And my final thought on that part of it is, look, in our education system, we do teach Shakespeare. I just feel like we teach the wrong Shakespeare, and people really should read King Lear.
Interesting.
Well,
Let me throw a question out there. Linda, you might be the best one for this, if I may, because again, for myself and also for people that might be listening, I want to sort of separate fact from fiction, and what is leaning towards conspiracy theory and what's leaning towards what could actually happen. I mean, some people suspect that the reason Trump is fighting so hard is because he's worried he's going to go to jail when he leaves office. Is this a reasonable thing that could happen, or
Great
is that just
question.
wishful
Yeah,
thinking?
sure is.
It is a great question. Look,
I'm at the edge of
it
my seat
doesn't.
here. I'm leaning forward.
Just before I answer that, if I may, only because you're right about the Goldwater thing. That was a different time, and they all went en masse and said you have to resign. But I also think I just want to point out, Richard Nixon also wanted to salvage what he thought was left of his legacy, even though he had done something wrong. This man does not believe in legacy. I think he's going to be the first president never to call the next president-elect to say I resign. I mean, he's going to slash and burn. He's already been firing people. He's going to slash and burn his way out. Having said that, he's obviously, I don't know if he's going to want a pardon, okay? Because that would mean that he did something wrong. There was a rumor today that the reason why that he was having all the lawyers come in was to discuss his options. Does he resign and let Pence pardon him? I don't think he can pardon himself. I don't think that would ever hold up in a court. Now, but at some point, he's got to come out of the office, right? Now, federally, let's assume he gets pardoned. Let's assume he gets pardoned, okay? Let's assume
By Pence, you're saying? Okay.
By Pence. He sets down the last day and lets Pence pardon him on the last day. Let's just assume that happened, just for the point of argument right here. He's not immune from any state lawsuits. Now, I'm not a big fan of Cy Vance. I'm not sure that he's going to be able to bring it forward, indict him and all, even though he's getting all this information. But the Attorney General of the state of New York, Letitia James, is one tough cookie. She is very bright. And if there is a crime to be had, she will go after him, in my opinion. All right. But then we're back to the question of Nixon, right? And Gerald Ford. For those of you that can remember that's watching this, the next president, Gerald Ford, was a Republican, pardoned Richard Nixon, right? Pardoned him for all his crimes. Because it said, we need to move forward as a country. Is that something that Joe Biden does?
I'd like to interject something.
Another great question, by the way. I've considered that. I don't know what the answer is. If he did it, part of me would hate it and part of me would love it. I really don't.
Yeah, excuse me for a second, though. It's a very important distinction. Linda, I'd like you to address this. A lot of Donald Trump's alleged crimes are financial crimes, things that he did before office while running for office. A lot of it's while he was running for office and was not the president. Now, Nixon's crimes almost entirely were while he was in the White House. So Ford pardoning Nixon a month after his resignation in September of '74 was pardoning him for essentially his predecessor for crimes while committed in office, mostly the cover-up. You're talking, though, about why would Joe Biden pardon Trump for, again, obviously campaign finance crimes, a lot of things that happened before 2017, January 2017 when he took office, and particularly his financial intricacies, a lot of stuff a lot of shit there that everyone knows with Deutsche Bank, who knows what funding out of Russia, and so forth and so on. Now, I want to know, are you saying a pardon all the way across the board, financial crimes and everything?
For federal, he can only pardon, anyone who's president can only pardon for federal crimes. They cannot pardon for state crimes, period. Okay? So if President Smith wants to pardon President Kenney Baden, right? Let's assume, right? The pardon can be for anything you've ever done your whole life for federal crimes. It's across the board. I pardon you for any federal crime you may have been committed. But the power of the pardon under the United States Constitution does not apply to state crimes.
And a lot of his financial crimes are out of New York, is what you're saying. Like they could.
That's what it looks like. That's why Cy Vance has been doing the investigation and dealing with the federal court, saying that these are New York crimes.
Linda, do you think that's why he moved to Florida?
Wow, good question.
Oh, wow, good question. I hadn't really
wow.
thought about that. Is that why he moved to Florida? I don't know the answer to that. It's not going to save him if he had crimes in New York. It's not going to save him from being indicted. income tax purposes. If he's 6 months plus 1 day in Florida, he doesn't pay taxes on any New York income. I mean, that could have something to do with it. I mean, his building is literally 3.5 blocks from both my home in New York City and my office. Okay. Quite frankly, I hope he never comes back to New York City, except unless he's extradited.
I mean, you just gave me something new to dream about, by the way. Like now my new dream is that his whole strategy hinges upon being pardoned on the last day, and then Pence ascends and then refuses to pardon him. That would just be like, oh my God, just everything perfect.
Oh, that would be interesting, but I don't think that would happen. I mean, Pence.
No.
I mean, Pence is. Everyone said, oh, if Trump's down in the middle of his term. I mean, Pence is a pretty bad guy, and he's responsible pretty much for that AIDS epidemic going out of control when he was governor. Remember that? He's really, I mean, he's just. I mean, he's out there.
One more question for you, Linda, on just this whole thing, because I find it fascinating. The cultural norms and the political norms in our country, our society, have been you don't go after your political opponents and try and throw them into jail and that sort of thing. It's just sort of how historically we've run as a country. And I'm just curious how you see that playing out. I don't have a good answer for it. And that's why and not just you, Linda, but everyone, how everyone sees it playing out. But I just want to start with Linda, because it's entirely possible that he committed crimes in New York. And I think you're right. The attorney general there, she is so sharp, and if she gets something, she's going to go after him and do it. Is that a smart play? Is that something we want to be doing as a country, society, or should we be? I mean, there's sort of two ways to look at it, right? One is no one's above the law, and the other one is, you want to know what? We just went through this. Let's move beyond it and go.
No, it's a really interesting thing too, because you have different parts of New York. You have some very conservative Republicans that were elected more upstate, right? I mean, New York is not, while my vote didn't count because most of New York voted.
I'm from Albany, New York, and I say it's Alabama with snow.
I used to live in Clifton Park, New York, for a few years.
Oh, were you in Nexium?
Yeah, it's a whole different thing. So your juries in New York City.
My dad used to work for GE.
Okay, that's
your juries in New York City are one thing, but your juries upstate, as we know from regular criminal cases. There was a criminal case called Amadou Diallo, right? And the cops were indicted for shooting him and moved to Albany, and they were not guilty. In New York City, they would have been convicted. So, your juries are two different things. I mean, Joe Biden does not appear to me to be the type of president who would want to see Trump prosecuted because he's trying to heal the nation. If the shoe were on the other foot, as we've talked about in the past, right? Yeah. I mean, he'd throw him in jail as quickly as you could imagine, with even on all the rallies. So, I mean, we're talking about the difference between morality and healing and criminality, and as far as I'm concerned, Trump has done such damage to us just with the whole coronavirus thing, and making science. I mean, I worry as a trial attorney, what do we do with science now in the courtroom, right?
I don't think science knows.
I don't know. People know. They don't like science. My feeling is everybody who was anti-science in this, next time they go to the hospital and want to get operated on, goodbye, send them home. I mean,
there's a chapel. You can send them to go pray in the chapel.
My Italian comes out. But I think he's done so much damage to this country. It's going to be a long time before we heal.
If we're very honest, just to address what Vin asked, if we're very honest, is having these fantasies of Donald Trump going to jail in its purest form, is it any different than lock her up? Like, those people genuinely thought Hillary Clinton had committed crimes and they wanted to see justice served. Like that. Do I think we're a little more righteous? Of course, but so do they. So if lock him up doesn't become a thing in the interest of healing, I will accept that. I will not like it. I will want to see justice served, but on the off chance that works, I'll just wash. Not that my say matters, but I'll go, fine. You know what? If this is what it takes, I personally, I would deal with never having that satisfaction.
I'm going to give the opposite, if I may.
Sure.
For two reasons. Number one, is that while Joe Biden wants to bring the country
My
together and
dog
all
just
that,
walked in.
oh no, hello dog, he doesn't have to get his hands dirty, right? He's got plenty of people willing to do that
Totally.
without him getting involved at all. He could be the unifier while Kamala Harris and whoever it gets appointed as Attorney General, wouldn't it be something if it's Hillary Clinton? But I mean, whoever it is, they could do the dirty work, right? That's number one. Number two is that we're pointing out the differences with Richard Nixon. I mean, he disappeared into the sunset for the most part, right? I mean,
There was no Twitter.
there was no Twitter, and there was no offspring that had political aspirations, right? What did we see from Nolan? That freaking Donald Trump Jr. is polling as a legitimate candidate in 2024. You got to end this now.
Second in the Republican poll at 20%.
Right. I mean,
Wow.
there
Wow, I didn't
has
know
to be
that.
an
Wow.
end to that now. You can't just
right.
pardon him and then the rest of his family is allowed to continue as if nothing had happened. That's all.
We
I'm gonna
should
say.
show no righteous outrage over Donald Trump Jr. being a Republican or a frontrunner, because you want to know what? All of these things 4 years out are based on name recognition. And the fact of the matter is, more people know who Donald Trump Jr. is in the conservative ecosystem than they know who any of the potential candidates in 2024 are. So it's really easy for someone in a poll to say, oh, I've heard of that one. Sure, why not? Especially when you're coming off an election where their hero didn't do it, and this is the closest thing to it.
Yeah, but we're talking about that. What about him? What about Donald Trump, who just is, on his way out the door? I mean, he's going to be tweeting every single day. He's going to start a network. He's going to be at Joe Biden every day. We talk about like being nicey and reaching out. I think he's going to be with us and causing us great agita. And I may have to be, at the first time in my life, go to my doctor and say, give me sleeping pills because I can't take another 4 years of no sleep.
I agree with you, Linda. My only point about the whole Donald Trump polling at 20% was two-part. One, it's the stupidest question. It's the stupidest poll to run.
Right.
Two, it's the stupidest question to ask. And three, I mean, us wasting time on something just so stupid that never should have been run and never should have been asked is just a waste of our
I completely
time.
disagree with that. I
Oh,
completely
okay.
disagree with you there. Wait a minute. When a reality TV star show with 6 bankruptcies and 2 ex-wives and countless scandals came down an escalator in mid-2015, no one took him seriously either.
That
We're in
was
a whole
2
different
that was 2 years out.
political environment now.
Yeah, well, that's 2 years out.
No, I mean, it's a totally fair point about the poll being meaningless. I was just using that as an
Oh,
example.
I get it.
But
What I'm suggesting is these people, especially the Republican Party, is really susceptible to this. It's not a party of ideas. They'll flip flop. I could talk about free trade earlier. They'll grasp any issue for the sake of political expediency. Anything doesn't matter.
I mean,
They're not even stating principle.
I mean, my point wasn't the question is stupid. I mean, my point wasn't the question is stupid. It's just that this is a question that gets asked after every election.
Yeah.
It was asked after Hillary Clinton lost. Who do you think is going to be the front runner 4 years from now? Honestly, I have no idea what the answer is.
Dan, excuse me for a second. I still think you're underselling it, underestimating this effect, because let's just take prospective presidential candidate A. I'm just going to make up somebody. A congressperson from Georgia. Now he's got an agent and a campaign manager and start thinking about 2024 running, and he wants to book himself on whatever show. And then you got Donald Trump Jr. making the same phone call, wants to go on the show. Which one do you think the booking manager is going to take on the network? Donald Trump Jr. and Eric, or even Ivanka especially, being female, more attractive. These are people that if they want to, and I hate to use this word, inherit the dynasty, accept the mantle and run with it, they are in a prime position. They've got 71 million people susceptible to a message. Doesn't matter if the message is garbage or not, it's a message. And now you've got younger, more vibrant people with a name ID. Don't discount the fact that, the question's too early, it's not even a big deal. Oh, I'd be very afraid of these people.
Vin, go ahead. You've been trying to respond.
The thing I wanted to say about it is that there are cycles of attention where these things matter. I mean, there just are. There are cycles of attention where these things matter. There are cycle of attentions when these things start mattering and people start paying attention. And it is during those cycles of attention that things matter. So if you take a look at President Trump right now, the reason he was able to launch his campaign in 2015, and I will partially agree with you here. The reason he was able to launch his campaign in 2015 is he spent the better part of 6 years questioning Obama's birth certificate and keeping himself in the news cycle, right? But that had nothing to do with him being, polling at 20% in 2008 for a possible presidential run. That had everything to do with the fact that he was a self-promoter and keeping his name in the circle and that sort of thing. And if you are seeing Donald Trump Jr. or Ivanka Trump trying to keep their name out there and stay relevant over the course of the next few years as they set themselves up for a presidential run, that's fine. That is a time to start thinking about it and worrying about it and that sort of thing. But you've got Nikki Haley. I mean, you've got like 20 suitors. You think the Democratic stage was big for the presidential debates in the primary season? Now you're going to have to triple the size for the Republican candidate field the next time around. And so and that's the point I'm trying to make, is that any poll out this early is about name recognition and nothing else. It's not about whether they actually believe he's a viable candidate. It's not about whether they would actually vote for him. It's not about any of those things. It's, do I recognize that person's name? Yes. And that's the extent to which it matters.
Let me pull.
And I'll let everybody else discuss this, but it's a very quick point to refute and then bring everybody else in on this. You said something like vehemently disagree with Vin, and again, if you want to retort, that's fine. But you mentioned that the election cycle's over, people are exhausted, they're not paying attention. Yes, agreed. However, all of you are very politically astute people. You've watched elections, you know how they are. Elections are not won in the final year. They're usually won, or at least the foundation is set, when no one's looking. If you go back to Trumpism, it was Frank Luntz, Stephen Miller, and Steve O'Bannon meeting in 2013, talking about essentially swaying the Republican Party on immigration. Breitbart launching then a big anti-immigrant type movement that completely shifted the narrative in the Republican Party from an exclusionary, I can't talk today, and a party of inclusion with immigrants to a completely nationalistic, almost racist type messaging that was again happened while no one was watching. No one's paying attention after 2012 and Mitt Romney lost, and these people met essentially in Washington and created the foundation for Donald Trump in 2013. Yeah. That is going to happen. There's going to be a post-mortem on this election.
Nolan, you're leaving out a lot of context.
And that's what's going to happen here.
You're leaving out a lot of context, Nolan. After 2012, there was this whole post-mortem, the Republican post-mortem, where they put together this big document talking about what they have to do in the future. They brought in a new RNC chair, Michael Steele. A lot of things happened where they were trying to get younger and more diverse and do that sort of thing. And then you had Bannon and all of that plotting off on the side, and Stephen Miller plotting off the side to do that. But all of that groundwork, prep work did not happen in the 1 day, 2 day afterwards, right? If you take a look at the candidates that were talked about and mentioned, if you did a Twitter poll in 2012 and said, hey, who do you think is going to win the Republican nominee the next time around? Trump wouldn't have even been on the list. And so that's my point, is that, yes, what you're talking about, all of that planning, all of that work is going to happen, but it's going to happen next year. It doesn't start now. There are people with presidential ambitions that have already started, like Nikki Haley's already started, Mike Pence has already started. All of that stuff is happening, but it doesn't register with the public. That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay. And let me pull this back for a second, because I'm so sorry that they're all excellent points, but really all that I was trying to say was, like, when we were talking about the issue of pardons, there's always been sort of an understanding, an unspoken understanding, where it's like, if you receive a pardon, go off quietly into the sunset. And I think that's why you don't pardon Trump, because he and or his family are not going to go quietly into the sunset. And whether or not he's a viable presidential candidate, I shouldn't have even thrown that in. But having said that, so that's the argument. I think that somebody prosecutes him and just not Joe Biden getting his hands dirty. I mean, because he's a collaborator. So I mean, if we're trying to stay positive with what's going on here, and then the question is, can he work together with people? Well, actually, I'm sorry, before I even go there, Vin, let me ask you one quick question, so that we have our expectations realistic. About what percentage chance do you say that Democrats get the 2 seats in Georgia at this point in time?
Good question.
I don't know. And the reason I don't know, and it's the most honest answer I can give, is because you've got 2 distinct factors at play, right? And both are going to motivate the base. If you take a look at what happened in this presidential election, so I'm going to qualify. There are things I think happened and things I know that happened. And I'll try and delineate between the two as best as I can. So the things I know that happened were that one, Vice President Biden's president-elect now, that both Biden and Trump both earned more votes than any other presidential candidate in history. That voter turnout was at an all-time high. I also know that Republican candidates outperformed the president. They won their races. They didn't just win their races at the Senate level, they won it at the congressional level, they won it at the state legislative levels. And so there's a lot of unpacking that needs to be done into why that happened. Now, the Democrats, if you looked at the Democrat Senate seats, for example, looked at the beginning of last year, how many pickups you'd had, you would have projected maybe 1 or 2, not total takeover. Expectations changed, it reverted back to the end. Most of the races that were lost were within the margin error of polling. There were a couple that are outside, but no major offsets, so to speak. And so there is a reasonable question as to why, from just a polling standpoint, 48 out of the 50 states, the polls got the right winner in the presidential election, but they missed badly on the House and on a lot of the down ballot stuff. And so now you begin the process of piecing together why. And the reason we piece together why, or we try to piece together why, is that's what informs us as to what's going to happen in Georgia. And it's really tough to say because you have 2 motivating forces in Georgia. You're going to have a group of voters who are going to say this is a check on President-elect Biden. And so, yes, we elected someone that with decency, but his party fundamentally doesn't conform with our values as an electorate, and we need to put in a Republican check on him. So that's one way to do it. The other way to look at this race is to say, is a motivating factor for a state that just went blue, and say, you want to know what? Let's do this again. Let us go out and get our Democratic Senate candidates out there and do that. So those are the 2 animating things. The reason why I'm being equivocal about this is President Trump is no longer at the top of the ballot. And so one of the great distorting factors, because when you take a look at the way polling misses, so presidential elections typically have a polling miss of 3 to 4 points. All right, they do. If you look throughout history, there's a 3 to 4 point margin of error. It is not unusual to see what we saw this time around. And ultimately the polls were right in terms of the ultimate outcome, but not on the margins. And so what you saw with President Trump is he drove turnout. He absolutely drove turnout. So while he lost office, the Republican Party became the party of Trump. I don't know what it means to be the party of Trump from a value standpoint. I also don't know what it means to be the party of Trump when your leader isn't there. So these are dynamics that these are weird dynamics. And so is turnout going to be, there's an argument to be made that the Democratic turnout in Georgia will match what you saw here because they are on a voting roll and they are organized and they're well organized. And so there's an argument to be made there. And there's an argument to be made that you want to know what the Republicans are going to be just as animated because they want to maintain the control. And which one wins, I don't know. And part of my struggle with all of this, and then I've talked way too long on this, so I'll shut up and be quiet, and I apologize. But part of my struggle with this is because in trying to figure out where the polls went wrong, polls capture sentiment, right? They capture sentiment, and there are some structural problems with polling right now that are hard to overcome. When you're trying to do polls, you're trying to get a representative sample, and sometimes you don't reach enough people to get a representative sample, so you start weighting things based on census and residency and counts and all sorts of things, and you end up with introducing some error on that. But then you make assumptions based on history on what an electorate is going to look like, and there are also been errors made in there. I don't think anyone saw the Republican turnout being as high. And then the Democratic turnout was good. It was really good, but and so we don't know things like Trump had an outstanding ground game this election. He was able to turn out voters. We think, but we don't know. We think he had an outstanding ground game. And we think Biden didn't have an outstanding ground game because he didn't have a ground game. They chose not to do one. With some exceptions, and Georgia was one of them, where Stacey Abrams had her own ground game there, but they didn't. So was the polling missed because there was no ground game? If this had been a more conventional election, would the polls have been dead on? Because then you would have compared two equal ground games and turnout and all of that sort of stuff. I don't know the answers to those questions, and so it's just really hard because the exit polls have been all over the place. We haven't had any good exit poll data. The range and variance is just so high that there's no value in it whatsoever. So if you see people citing exit polls as explanation of what's going on, they're lying to you because we don't know. They're all over the place. They're all constructed differently. No one knows anything. And we're probably gonna have to wait for Pew, who does a great job of this, to come out a couple months later and like really dig deep into the data and get all of this stuff done for us to get a better idea. So I don't know. My guess is it's a coin flip because both sides have animating reasons to go out and vote. They're probably excited about going out to vote. And that's the best I could say. I think it's both a coin flip. I mean, if you put a gun to my head, I'd say the Republicans get them both. But a split is also very likely because Loeffler just isn't a good candidate.
Got it.
Wow.
It's hard to envision a split, even though I think that's the betting suggestion, or the gambling world suggestion is that a split is the most likely result, and yet that just seems so foreign, right? Like with the
Speaking of the betting markets, can you guys get into the betting market just being so wrong?
No, this is like tomorrow's an NFL Sunday. This is kind of like looking at they're one touchdown underdogs. I'm talking about the Democrats. They're like a touchdown underdog, and you got to basically put a two-team parlay together and win both dogs. That's kind of what it's like. Because if the Democrats just win one of the races, Republicans still control 51-49. So
what's going to happen with the Al Gross race?
One thing, let me finish just for a moment, Linda, and I like your response.
I'm sorry. No.
But I disagree with the Loeffler evaluation earlier, because if you were to look at Purdue was solidly up 2.5 to 3 points. So Purdue's going to be tough to beat anyway. Loeffler's not a good candidate. I agree. She has vulnerabilities, scandals, and so forth. But look at the breakdown of that race. The Democratic candidate only got, I think, 33%, somewhere in there. And if you were to combine the two Republicans who were running, it was like, I don't know, 60%, somewhere in there, well over 50%. So I'm trying to figure out the fact that, let's see, Biden won Georgia, close, but a lot of people went into in the Republican, voted for one of the two major Republicans there. So that does not inspire a lot of confidence for the Democrat running against Loeffler.
Yeah, so a couple of things there, Nolan, and then Linda, I'll let you go. It's just it's a quote unquote jungle primary in Georgia, right?
Sure,
Which is Yeah, you've got a bunch of candidates in that. And so, yeah, you had the Republican candidate split and the Democratic candidate do that. I'm not sure about Georgia election law, and so I'll have to look it up. But one of the things I found interesting, and I'm not sure what the impact is, but over the course of the last 6 to 8 years, we've seen the elimination of straight party voting on the state level. Which means what happens is a lot of the down ballot races end up losing. And this was a Republican push to eliminate straight party voting. They felt if they eliminated straight party voting, they would do better in the election because
you mean that as a ballot option, right? Where you just basically go in and pull one lever, the entire thing goes blue. You're talking about that specifically, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know what the ballot construction was like in Georgia. I haven't seen the ballot. And so a lot of this comes down to ballot construction. How is the ballot constructed? How far down the ballot do people have to go to make all the votes that they've done? Is straight party voting allowed? Isn't it? It isn't. It's really hard to make those determinations unless you've done that level of analysis, and I haven't. And so, but my belief, and this is why, and this is my belief, is that the Democratic Party is going to get behind the two Senate candidates hard. They don't have a presidential race to worry about. They don't have any state legislative races to worry about. They don't have any of those things to worry about. They have two Senate candidates. There's going to be a lot of outside money pouring in. I think that what's going to happen is this whole don't knock on doors sort of thing, that's going to go out the window. They're going to go knocking on doors. They're going to try and turn out low propensity voters. Because this is the other thing that I've got a working theory, and then I've got a working theory on the campaign, but I don't have any data to prove it. So this is once again in the category of things that I don't know, which is I suspect, I don't know, and this is why I think we got the votes that we did. I suspect that Biden won among high information voters and high propensity voters across the board. And I think President Trump did a terrific job of turning out low propensity voters. And as a result, I think Biden wins on the national level and gets the presidency. But everything else went Republican because President Trump and his campaign did such a good job at turning out low propensity voters. And because the Democrats abandoned the ground game, and you need a ground game to turn out low propensity voters, they weren't able to match. That is my general theory of the race. I have no data.
You're suggesting, though, they're not going to turn out in January, right? Everyone's going to be sick of the election, sick of TV commercials.
No, I think it's going to be a high turnout, but I think it's going to be high turnout on both sides. Yeah, I think it's going to be high turnout on both sides. I just don't know whether they'll match the margins of this in terms of turnout. But I think it's going to be high turnout on both sides. But I think this low propensity, high propensity, I think the Democrats will get low propensity voters in this as well as high propensity voters. But like I said, that's just a theory of the race. The broad parameters kind of make sense, but I have no data to back it up. So it's just a theory I'm kicking around.
Linda or Joe, anything to add?
Yeah. I just had asked Vin one other question about Al Gross. What do you think that's going to turn out to be in Alaska? They don't count their votes till next week.
I don't know. I struggle with Alaska, and Alaska's. Alaska's just this really interesting state that just defies. It doesn't defy explanation, but it doesn't fit neatly into any of the parameters that we think about. It's a state that doesn't get much polling done, and what polling is done is unreliable. And so it's not like we can sit there. I mean, we tend to know end results in Alaska, but we don't tend to know how we got there. I don't know. I would love to spend time in Alaska diving into some of this stuff, just because we lack so much information and data about Alaska, but it's just so hard, and I couldn't tell you.
How did the poll? One other question. how did the polls get the Susan Collins race so wrong? I mean,
That's what
forget
I'd
the
like to know.
president.
Great question.
Yeah,
That was
so
July. She wasn't ahead in any poll since July, and then here she handily beats the Democrat.
yeah, so I think this is, so there were some significant polling misses down ballot. Susan Collins was one in Maine. The other big one was in Wisconsin. The Wisconsin polls were just awful. So both of them were really bad. I'm betting this is a ground game thing. I think Susan Collins did a significantly better job turning out voters than the challenger. And I mean, I spent some time in Maine in September, and it was interesting because Susan Collins was not on TV. I was in several different neighborhoods in Maine, and it seemed like all the energy and everything was, I mean, Susan Collins was just outclassed, and I was surprised because I did not expect to see that in Maine. There was a lot of stuff there, but I think in the end. I think in the end, there's a fundamental level of decency and respect for Susan Collins that just wasn't reflected in the polls. And I think this goes back to some of the structural problems we have with polling, and that, you know, as that pollsters and we just simply can't run away from them, which is that. So if you take a look at the way polling used to happen in like the 60s and 70s, you're randomly calling landlines. Everyone's got landlines, and you call the landlines, you get a representative sample of the electorate. You have a good idea what that is, and you've got that. And now, if you just call landlines now, you're going to end up with 85-year-old white women as your entire electorate, and you can't do it that way. So now you've got to start calling and call landlines. You got to call cell phones. You got to try different methods of reaching out to people, and you end up, because you can't quite get that perfect sample, you have to end up weighting it. And you have to end up weighting it using some statistical modeling. And I think we still have a ways to go to find some of that. And the voters that we're having the hardest time finding are the ones that are what I like to call low trust voters. These are voters that don't trust the system. They don't trust, it's not that they don't trust pollsters. They don't trust pollsters. They don't trust government. They don't trust, they don't trust the internet, or whatever it is. These are low trust. They have very low trust in institutions. But this is a sizable part of the electorate, and it's much more sizable now than it used to be. And finding a way to accurately represent and capture that data in polls is difficult. And I think the answer is in Maine. And the problem is I don't have good exit data to back it up. So this is all sort of speculation on my part. But I think the answer in Maine is that low trust voter is probably a higher percentage of the electorate than what was modeled. And as a result of that low trust voter being a higher percentage in the electorate than what was modeled, it wasn't accurately reflected in the composition of the polls.
Wow.
Fair enough.
I don't think I'm going to believe a poll ever again.
I think people are just embarrassed. To vote
Well,
for such a
I think
horrible person.
I think what's important for polls is I think they're worth believing to a certain point, right? The point of polling isn't to predict what's going to happen next. The point of polling is to capture sentiment at a moment in time. And it's not easy to capture sentiment in a moment of time. And what's happened is, because it used to be easier to capture sentiment as a point in time and turn that into a prognostication tool, people made a lot of money doing it. And what's happened is it's gotten, as we've become a more mobile and more diverse society, it's become harder to capture sentiment at a moment of time and then turn that sentiment into a prognostication tool. The sentiment is easier to grasp, but the prognostication tool is harder. But this is why this also goes back to my sort of data modeling. If we had had a normal election with a normal ground game, maybe everything is right. I don't know, because this whole high propensity, low propensity thing is something that needs to be hashed out. And I just don't know. But if anybody tells you that they figured everything out based on exit polling, they're lying to you, because the exit polling for this reveals nothing.
You know, this has been great. You know, we're 3 hours in, so I think
Oh my
for
God.
everyone's sake, we're gonna.
I was just hoping
try to
I
wrap
could
it
read a
up.
passage of a book real quick.
Please.
Uh,
Yeah.
It's from 50 Shades of Grey. Just
I'm pouring the
Please.
champagne. now.
Yes. Let's hear
no,
that.
no,
And
no.
by the way,
Oh,
can
come
we all
on.
get
We've
one-
all read it already.
Can we all get one minute of a closing remark?
Do we
Absolutely.
do toasts?
Please.
All right.
Well,
By the
I
way,
literally
want
drank
everybody to
every
know-
drop of everything. I was triple fisting, and it's all gone.
All right, here we go.
all right.
Oh, lovely.
Oh boy.
Look at that. Woo. And Linda Kenney Baden, you're the one who got me on my champagne kick, by the way.
I can't believe it.
No, you
First
did.
time
You're the
I
one who
met
got me
Nolan,
addicted to this.
He
You're
was
like a
at a
fish.
restaurant. We were at my first World Series of poker, and I sent you over a bottle of champagne, right?
Yes, you did.
And then he
Which
told me
changed my
he
life.
didn't drink champagne.
And he's been living large ever since. I'm telling you.
So I'll begin with a minute, and we can all close and then say goodnight. And thank you for those that have watched. I just want to tell a real quick story. And by the way, so this is just an unbelievable moment. I watched that speech of Biden and Harris, and I got to say, I didn't think that Biden was capable of that. Even at this late date, I underestimated the power, the persuasiveness of Joe Biden, and certainly Kamala Harris. I'd like to go back to the Nevada primaries here in February. It was early February of 2020, and we had an open primary, a caucus, I said primary, excuse me, a caucus here in Nevada, where people here in my state went to largely schools, and we had to caucus. And the caucus is different than a primary in the sense you have to meet your neighbors and you talk about candidates, and then you come to a consensus. Like we have, I forgot the number, but let's say 6 delegates to send to the state convention to nominate. So you had, some really strong candidates running, very divided field. You know how many people showed up for Joe Biden in that day in February 4th of 2020?
Not many.
2 out of 60, 65. Joe Biden did not get one delegate in my precinct, not one. Elizabeth Warren got 2, Bernie Sanders got 2. I think that Buttigieg maybe got, I forgot the breakdown, but Joe Biden had almost no support. He was almost dead politically in February, almost dead. Bernie Sanders was having rallies. Everybody was showing up. Everyone thought a so-called socialist, a socialist, an avowed socialist, was going to get the nomination, and the Democratic Party comes together and says, whoa, is this really what we want? And by the way, a lot of Sanders supporters are still bitter about this. And then all of a sudden, Super Tuesday happens in March, and Joe Biden is essentially reborn as a political candidate. And then COVID happens. COVID, shutdown, lockdown. And essentially, there's almost no traditional campaign like we're used to seeing in the United States, except for the TV commercials and phone calls. There was just none of the certain, circus atmosphere regarding presidential campaigns. And here we now are in February 7th, I think it is. And I just watched after finally, all this frustration of really not just 4 years, but 6 years of seeing Donald Trump on the scene every single day. And then I'm thinking, was that the guy that I expected to give that speech tonight about unity, saying exactly the right things, bringing people together, a sense of power, empowerment, a sense of unity, inclusion for everyone? I mean, me, I'm the most militant person, certainly one of the militant people politically on social media. I was there completely melted on the floor, again, with a tear in my eye, my wife is watching. We completely were melted and moved and persuaded by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I didn't think that they were capable, especially Biden, of moving me emotionally off of my militancy. I was moved by that speech. That's how powerful that moment was for me. And that's how I close this evening tonight.
Thank you, Nolan. Linda, how about your closing thoughts?
Just a toast to all of us, because let's face it, we all did it. And no matter what you think of Joe Biden, after Jim Clyburn kind of refreshed him in South Carolina, he ran one hell of a campaign here. I mean, the highest amount of votes ever. I mean, with a woman as a vice presidential candidate, a woman of color. I mean, he flipped these states. I mean, if he can do that, maybe we all underestimated him, and maybe President Obama was right to pick him as vice president. But I'd just like to hope that the future is really good as we feel it is today.
You're here.
You're here.
You're here. We get to drink 5 times, right?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Go, Joe.
Look, I'm just glad that the Democrat won so we can all finally stop pretending that there's COVID. It was great. I'm just ready to be done with this. It was really, we came together as a nation to all pretend like there was a disease, and we got the doctors in on it, and we got the hospitals in on it, and it was just really well coordinated all around. And it'll be nice to be able to hug people again. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most.
We even got Big Pharma in on the conspiracy.
We got them all. And thank God nobody listened about the hydroxychloroquine.
None of us could pronounce before it.
Oh, yes, we are all hydroxychloroquine experts now.
Vin, how about you?
I'm going to end on a more personal note. And like I said, I don't often talk about myself in these sorts of things. And this isn't necessarily about me, but it's more a reflection of where we are as a country and who we are as a country, which is my parents emigrated here in 1971. And they came here because they needed economic opportunity. And, my dad started off working in a factory and worked his way up from there. And my mom is named Kamala. And I'm tearing up talking about this, but growing up, I didn't know anyone named Kamala. There was nothing. There were no Indians in the towns that we lived in. I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every day for lunch because I tried bringing Indian food to lunch once and got laughed out of the cafeteria. And so I talked about earlier how when Obama became president, it was proof that someone like me could do that. And seeing Kamala Harris become vice president is just so deeply and personally satisfying that it just meant the world to me to see that happen.
Oh, I'm going to drink twice.
Congratulations.
Yes. I don't want to follow that. Yeah, I don't
last
want
dropout.
Oh my God.
No, but that was wonderful to hear. I mean, I should stay off of social media like you did, Vin. I think that was the right move when you did that. But I mean, just looking at it today, I mean, of course, we've got all these celebratory posts, and we should. I mean, we deserve to celebrate. But while half of the posts are like strictly celebratory, I mean, half of them are clearly aimed to rub the other side's nose in it, and some people might argue that they deserve it. Maybe some of them do. But, if we can't celebrate without shoving the opponent's nose in it, then we're going to remain divided, and that's not what Joe Biden wants. That's not what most of us want, I don't think. Trumpism has been a stain on our country. But let's at least give people a chance to defect from it. When Trump won and took office in 2017, as devastating as that was for so many people, a lot of us tried to keep like this glimmer of hope, like maybe he could rise to the occasion, and rise to the level of the office. And, even though it clearly didn't happen and that hope was short-lived, that hope was there,
That hope died the second he lied about his inauguration size.
It really did. It died immediately, but just people needed some hope. And I think right now, that goes for Trump supporters as well. All they're being fed through Fox News and similar news outlets is doom and gloom about what to expect going forward. And they need hope. They need positivity. They need to understand that the anti-Biden rhetoric that was thrown around during a hotly contested election has nothing to do with who he really is. It was meant to generate fear, right? Fear has been Trump's greatest weapon. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are offering an alternative of hope and unity. And many of us have embraced that. And my hope is that people on both sides can come to embrace that. Even if you don't support the candidate's position, at least support their desire to bring the country together, because we all need that as much as we need any policy change. So here's to hope and unity, and hoping against all odds that it can happen. Even the eternal pessimist is going to be an optimist today.
That's like taking communion.
So thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation. It has been wonderful. I have learned a lot. Everybody that has listened is now better off than they were when they first started listening, just from all of the insight that has been provided by all of you. Thank you so much. And that is all there is to say. This has been an intelligent conversation. Everyone have a wonderful night, and let's hope for the best going forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Nice.